Good evening, dear listener. Tonight, we open the pages of one of the most enchanting tales ever told. But before we begin, if these quiet stories bring you peace, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. I'd truly love to know where you're listening from and what hour of the night finds you here. Our little circle now stretches across oceans, bound by stories and calm. So dim the lights, let the air grow still, and let your mind wander gently with me into tonight's story. The Tinder-Box. A soldier came marching along the high road. Left, right, left, right. He had his knapsack on his back and a sword at his side. He had been to the wars and was now returning home. As he walked on, he met a very frightful-looking old witch in the road. Her underlip hung quite down on her breast, and she stopped and said, "Good evening, soldier. You have a very fine sword and a large knapsack, and you are a real soldier, so you shall have as much money as ever you like." "Thank you, old witch," said the soldier. "Do you see that large tree?" said the witch, pointing to a tree which stood beside them. "Well, it is quite hollow inside, and you must climb to the top, when you will see a hole, through which you can let yourself down into the tree to a great depth. I will tie a rope round your body, so that I can pull you up again when you call out to me." "But what am I to do down there in the tree?" asked the soldier. "Get money," she replied. "For you must know that when you reach the ground under the tree, you will find yourself in a large hall, lighted up by 300 lamps. You will then see 3 doors, which can be easily opened, for the keys are in all the locks. On entering the first of the chambers to which these doors lead, you will see a large chest standing in the middle of the floor, and upon it a dog seated with a pair of eyes as large as teacups. But you need not be at all afraid of him. I will give you my blue checked apron, which you must spread upon the floor, and then boldly seize hold of the dog and place him upon it. You can then open the chest and take from it as many pence as you please. They are only copper pence. But if you would rather have silver money, you must go into the second chamber. Here you will find another dog, with eyes as big as mill wheels, but do not let that trouble you. Place him upon my apron, and then take what money you please. If, however, you like gold best, enter the third chamber, where there is another chest full of it. The dog who sits on this chest is very dreadful. His eyes are as big as a tower, but do not mind him. If he also is placed upon my apron, he cannot hurt you, and you may take from the chest what gold you will." "This is not a bad story," said the soldier. "But what am I to give you, you old witch? For of course you do not mean to tell me all this for nothing." "No," said the witch, "but I do not ask for a single penny. Only promise to bring me an old tinder-box, which my grandmother left behind the last time she went down there." "Very well, I promise. Now tie the rope round my body." "Here it is," replied the witch, "and here is my blue checked apron." As soon as the rope was tied, the soldier climbed up the tree and let himself down through the hollow to the ground beneath. And here he found, as the witch had told him, a large hall in which many hundred lamps were all burning. Then he opened the first door. Ah, there sat the dog, with the eyes as large as teacups, staring at him. "You're a pretty fellow," said the soldier, seizing him and placing him on the witch's apron, while he filled his pockets from the chest with as many pieces as they would hold. Then he closed the lid, seated the dog upon it again, and walked into another chamber. And sure enough, there sat the dog with eyes as big as mill wheels. "You had better not look at me in that way," said the soldier. "You will make your eyes water." And then he seated him also upon the apron and opened the chest. But when he saw what a quantity of silver money it contained, he very quickly threw away all the coppers he had taken and filled his pockets and his knapsack with nothing but silver. Then he went into the third room, and there the dog was really hideous. His eyes were, truly, as big as towers, and they turned round and round in his head like wheels. "Good morning," said the soldier, touching his cap, for he had never seen such a dog in his life. But after looking at him more closely, he thought he had been civil enough, so he placed him on the floor and opened the chest. Good gracious, what a quantity of gold there was! Enough to buy all the sugar sticks of the sweet stuff women, all the tin soldiers, whips, and rocking horses in the world, or even the whole town itself. There was, indeed, an immense quantity, so the soldier now threw away all the silver money he had taken and filled his pockets and his knapsack with gold instead. And not only his pockets and his knapsack, but even his cap and boots, so that he could scarcely walk. He was really rich now, so he replaced the dog on the chest, closed the door, and called up through the tree, "Now pull me out, you old witch." "Have you got the tinder-box?" asked the witch. "No, I declare I quite forgot it." So he went back and fetched the tinder-box, and then the witch drew him up out of the tree, and he stood again in the high road, with his pockets, his knapsack, his cap, and his boots full of gold. "What are you going to do with the tinder-box?" asked the soldier. "That is nothing to you," replied the witch. "You have the money, now give me the tinder-box." "I tell you what," said the soldier, "if you don't tell me what you are going to do with it, I will draw my sword and cut off your head." "No," said the witch. The soldier immediately cut off her head, and there she lay on the ground. Then he tied up all his money in her apron and slung it on his back like a bundle, put the tinder-box in his pocket, and walked off to the nearest town. It was a very nice town, and he put up at the best inn and ordered a dinner of all his favorite dishes, for now he was rich and had plenty of money. The servant who cleaned his boots thought they certainly were a shabby pair to be worn by such a rich gentleman, for he had not yet bought any new ones. The next day, however, he procured some good clothes and proper boots, so that our soldier soon became known as a fine gentleman, and the people visited him and told him all the wonders that were to be seen in the town, and of the king's beautiful daughter, the princess. "Where can I see her?" asked the soldier. "She is not to be seen at all," they said. "She lives in a large copper castle, surrounded by walls and towers. No one but the king himself can pass in or out, for there has been a prophecy that she will marry a common soldier, and the king cannot bear to think of such a marriage." "I should like very much to see her," thought the soldier, but he could not obtain permission to do so. However, he passed a very pleasant time, went to the theater, drove in the king's garden, and gave a great deal of money to the poor, which was very good of him. He remembered what it had been in olden times to be without a shilling. Now he was rich, had fine clothes, and many friends, who all declared he was a fine fellow and a real gentleman, and all this gratified him exceedingly. But his money would not last forever, and as he spent and gave away a great deal daily and received none, he found himself at last with only 2 shillings left. So he was obliged to leave his elegant rooms and live in a little garret under the roof, where he had to clean his own boots and even mend them with a large needle. None of his friends came to see him. There were too many stairs to mount up. One dark evening, he had not even a penny to buy a candle. Then all at once he remembered that there was a piece of candle stuck in the tinder-box, which he had brought from the old tree, into which the witch had helped him. He found the tinder-box, but no sooner had he struck a few sparks from the flint and steel than the door flew open, and the dog, with eyes as big as teacups, whom he had seen while down in the tree, stood before him and said, "What orders, master?" "Hello," said the soldier. "Well, this is a pleasant tinder-box, if it brings me all I wish for." "Bring me some money," said he to the dog. He was gone in a moment, and presently returned, carrying a large bag of coppers in his month. The soldier very soon discovered after this the value of the tinder-box. If he struck the flint once, the dog who sat on the chest of copper money made his appearance. If twice, the dog came from the chest of silver. And if 3 times, the dog with eyes like towers, who watched over the gold. The soldier had now plenty of money. He returned to his elegant rooms and reappeared in his fine clothes, so that his friends knew him again directly and made as much of him as before. After a while he began to think it was very strange that no one could get a look at the princess. "Everyone says she is very beautiful," thought he to himself. "But what is the use of that if she is to be shut up in a copper castle surrounded by so many towers? Can I by any means get to see her? Stop! Where is my tinder-box?" Then he struck a light, and in a moment the dog, with eyes as big as teacups, stood before him. "It is midnight," said the soldier, "yet I should very much like to see the princess, if only for a moment." The dog disappeared instantly, and before the soldier could even look round, he returned with the princess. She was lying on the dog's back, asleep, and looked so lovely that everyone who saw her would know she was a real princess. The soldier could not help kissing her, true soldier as he was. Then the dog ran back with the princess, but in the morning, while at breakfast with the king and queen, she told them what a singular dream she had had during the night of a dog and a soldier, that she had ridden on the dog's back and been kissed by the soldier. "That is a very pretty story indeed," said the queen. So the next night one of the old ladies of the court was set to watch by the princess's bed, to discover whether it really was a dream, or what else it might be. The soldier longed very much to see the princess once more, so he sent for the dog again in the night to fetch her, and to run with her as fast as ever he could. But the old lady put on water boots, and ran after him as quickly as he did, and found that he carried the princess into a large house. She thought it would help her to remember the place if she made a large cross on the door with a piece of chalk. Then she went home to bed, and the dog presently returned with the princess. But when he saw that a cross had been made on the door of the house where the soldier lived, he took another piece of chalk and made crosses on all the doors in the town, so that the lady-in-waiting might not be able to find out the right door. Early the next morning, the king and queen accompanied the lady and all the officers of the household to see where the princess had been. "Here it is," said the king, when they came to the first door with a cross on it. "No, my dear husband, it must be that one," said the queen, pointing to a second door having a cross also. "And here is one, and there is another," they all exclaimed, for there were crosses on all the doors in every direction. so they felt it would be useless to search any farther. But the queen was a very clever woman. She could do a great deal more than merely ride in a carriage. She took her large gold scissors, cut a piece of silk into squares, and made a neat little bag. This bag she filled with buckwheat flour and tied it round the princess's neck. And then she cut a small hole in the bag so that the flour might be scattered on the ground as the princess went along. During the night, the dog came again and carried the princess on his back and ran with her to the soldier, who loved her very much and wished that he had been a prince so that he might have her for a wife. The dog did not observe how the flour ran out of the bag all the way from the castle wall to the soldier's house, and even up to the window, where he had climbed with the princess. Therefore, in the morning the king and queen found out where their daughter had been, and the soldier was taken up and put in prison. Oh, how dark and disagreeable it was as he sat there, and the people said to him, "Tomorrow you will be hanged." It was not very pleasant news, and besides, he had left the Tinder-Box at the inn. In the morning he could see through the iron grating of the little window how the people were hastening out of the town to see him hanged. He heard the drums beating and saw the soldiers marching. Everyone ran out to look at them, and a shoemaker's boy, with a leather apron and slippers on, galloped by so fast that one of his slippers flew off and struck against the wall where the soldier sat looking through the iron grating. "Hello, you shoemaker's boy, you need not be in such a hurry," cried the soldier to him. "There will be nothing to see till I come, but if you will run to the house where I have been living and bring me my Tinder-Box, you shall have 4 shillings, but you must put your best foot foremost." The shoemaker's boy liked the idea of getting the 4 shillings, so he ran very fast and fetched the Tinder-Box and gave it to the soldier. And now we shall see what happened. Outside the town, a large gibbet had been erected, round which stood the soldiers and several thousands of people. The king and the queen sat on splendid thrones opposite to the judges and the whole council. The soldier already stood on the ladder, but as they were about to place the rope around his neck, he said that an innocent request was often granted to a poor criminal before he suffered death. He wished very much to smoke a pipe, as it would be the last pipe he should ever smoke in the world. The king could not refuse this request, so the soldier took his Tinder-Box and struck fire. Once, twice, thrice, and there in a moment stood all the dogs. The one with eyes as big as teacups, the one with eyes as large as mill wheels, and the third, whose eyes were like towers. "Help me now, that I may not be hanged," cried the soldier. And the dogs fell upon the judges and all the counselors, seized one by the legs and another by the nose, and tossed them many feet high in the air, so that they fell down and were dashed to pieces. "I will not be touched," said the king. But the largest dog seized him, as well as the queen, and threw them after the others. Then the soldiers and all the people were afraid, and cried, "Good soldier, you shall be our king, and you shall marry the beautiful princess." So they placed the soldier in the king's carriage, and the 3 dogs ran on in front and cried, "Hurrah!" And the little boys whistled through their fingers, and the soldiers presented arms. The princess came out of the copper castle and became queen, which was very pleasing to her. The wedding festivities lasted a whole week, and the dogs sat at the table and stared with all their eyes. The shirt collar. Once, in the wardrobe of a fine and fashionable gentleman, there lived a shirt-collar of quite extraordinary pretensions. The gentleman possessed, among other worldly treasures, a bootjack, a hairbrush, and a comb of tortoiseshell. But the pride of all these possessions was the collar, white, high, and stiff, so fine in linen and so grand in opinion that it imagined itself the noblest piece of apparel ever starched. Now this self-important collar grew older with time, and one day, while floating in the soapy waters of the wash-tub, he began to dream of romance and marriage. A gentleman such as I, he mused, ought not to live alone forever. As fate would have it, that very morning he found himself beside a delicate blue garter, glimmering like a ribbon of sky in the suds. "Upon my word," cried the collar, twisting gallantly, "I have never beheld anything so slender, so graceful, so irresistibly refined. May I be so bold as to inquire your name, fair lady?" "I shall not tell you," replied the garter, blushing beneath the bubbles. "Ah, mysterious too, that only adds to your charm," continued the collar. "Might I at least ask where you reside when not bathing in this distinguished company?" But the garter, modest by nature and shy of strangers, gave no answer. "I presume," said the collar, lowering his voice, "that you are some sort of girdle, a dainty undergirdle, perhaps. How fitting! So useful, and yet so exquisitely ornamental. A perfect combination of grace and service." "You must not speak to me," said the garter firmly. "I do not recall giving you permission." "Oh, my dear," said the collar, puffing up his starch, "when beauty such as yours exists in the world, is it not encouragement enough for a gentleman to speak?" "Go away," said the garter. "You come far too close. I find it improper." "Improper!" exclaimed the collar. "Why, my dear, I am a man of standing, a fine gentleman. I own a bootjack and a hairbrush." This, of course, was quite untrue. Both belonged to his master. But the collar, alas, was a born boaster. The garter turned away, wishing the wash-tub would swallow her whole. "You are insufferable," she said, "and very presumptuous." The collar only laughed, sending tiny rings across the water. "Ah, modesty becomes you," he said. "A little coquetry adds warmth to beauty." Before the garter could retort, the washerwoman's hands swooped down. Both were lifted from the tub, rinsed and pegged upon a line beneath the bright morning sun. There they hung, two prisoners in the breeze, until they were carried indoors, starched stiff, and laid upon the ironing board. Then came the glowing iron, hissing like a dragon. "Mistress Widow," said the collar, "dear Mistress Widow, I feel positively warm in your company. I am changing, transforming beneath your touch. You are burning a hole straight through my heart. Oh, accept my hand. No, my seam. I propose to you." "You old rag," said the flat iron indignantly, pressing harder as if to punish him. "You miserable scrap of cloth. Do you fancy yourself worthy of a steam engine like me?" She puffed and rolled along the board as if she were indeed an iron horse upon its railway, while the collar hissed and whimpered beneath her weight. Soon after, his frayed edges were trimmed by a pair of sharp scissors. "Ah," sighed the collar in admiration, "what elegance of motion, what grace! You lift your leg, so slender, so precise. Truly, you dance divinely. I doubt any human could match your step." "I should think not," replied the scissors coldly. "You ought to be a countess," said the collar, swelling with admiration. "Were fortune mine, I would lay an estate at your feet. As it is, I have only my fine gentleman, a bootjack, and a comb, but my devotion is priceless." "What insolence!" cried the scissors. Is he proposing to me? Her temper flared, her blades snapped angrily, and in her fury she snipped too deeply. The poor collar screamed as a piece of him fell away. "Ah, cruel beauty," he groaned, and so he was cast aside as useless. "I shall have to propose to the hairbrush next," thought the collar, refusing to surrender his vanity. One day, spying her on the dressing table, he began flatteringly, "My dear lady, what magnificent hair you have, each strand more splendid than golden thread. Tell me, have you never dreamed of being engaged?" "Why, of course," replied the brush briskly. "I am already engaged, to the bootjack." "Engaged," cried the collar in despair. "Then there is no one left for me. Very well, I shall renounce love forever." From that hour he pretended to despise romance, though in secret he mourned every lost opportunity. Time passed. The gentleman wore him no more. Torn, yellowed, and stiff, the collar was thrown into a bag with other rags and carried to the paper mill. There, among heaps of linen remnants and tattered cloth, lay a great company of cast-off finery, each scrap with a history, each eager to boast of better days. "I was once a lace cuff at court," said one. "I adorned the wrist of a duchess," said another, but none talked louder than the shirt collar. "I have known more love affairs than any of you," he proclaimed proudly. "No one ever left me in peace. I was irresistible, a perfect gentleman with my own bootjack and hairbrush naturally. You should have seen me when freshly starched, my corners sharp as virtue itself. Ah, my first love, a garter of the softest silk, threw herself into the wash-tub for my sake. And the widow, the flat-iron, poor creature, she burned herself with passion for me. The dancer, the scissors, wounded me deeply. Love can be so cutting. Even the hairbrush lost all her hair from neglected affection. Oh, I have suffered in romance beyond measure. My conscience is heavy with broken hearts. Truly, it is time I be turned into white paper, to begin anew." And indeed, that is exactly what befell him. The rags were soaked, beaten, and pulped until nothing of their former selves remained. When they emerged again, they were reborn as sheets of clean, white paper, smooth, silent, and waiting. And one of those sheets, dear reader, was the very collar himself. Thus it happens that the story you are reading now is printed upon the remains of that vain and boasting shirt collar. It is his confession and his punishment, his pride ironed flat forever. So let this be a warning to all who boast of false glories. For pride, like linen, may one day find itself tossed into the rag bag, and our deeds, every little vanity, every hidden lie, may be written plainly for the world to read, just as his were. And would it not be dreadful to wander about the earth as a piece of paper, revealing every secret deed, as did the once proud, now humble shirt collar? The Silent Book. On the old high road that wound its way through the forest, far from the noise of the towns and the chatter of men, there stood a lonely farmhouse. The road itself passed straight through its courtyard, as though the world had once brushed past the place and then forgotten it. The windows were flung open to the warmth of a gentle spring morning. Sunlight drifted through, dancing across clean floors and polished furniture, awakening every quiet corner of the house. The sound of voices came faintly from within, slow, subdued, respectful. For today was not a day like others. Out in the yard, beneath a heavy arbor of lilacs bowed with blossoms, stood an open coffin. The scent of the flowers mingled with that of the moist earth, Bees hummed among the clusters, as though life itself did not pause, even for death. The dead man lay there in calm repose. His face was covered with a white linen cloth. Beneath his head rested a thick, gray-paged book, his only companion on this last journey. Between every broad leaf of paper lay withered flowers, pressed flat by time and memory. Some were pale as dust. Others still clung faintly to their colors, like faint voices from long ago. Each flower had once marked a moment, a memory, a sorrow, a joy, a love. The book was his life's chronicle, each petal a word, each scent a breath from the years that had vanished. He had asked that the book be buried with him, for he had said that in those pages lay the whole story of his heart. We asked who he was. The old student of Uppsala, they told us. Once he was a man of rare promise, a scholar, a linguist, a poet, a singer. They say his mind was bright and swift, his laughter clear and full of warmth. But something turned within him, as if some secret star in his soul went dark. He lost his way in wine and melancholy. The world slipped from his grasp, and he from the world. When his strength was spent, he came here to the countryside, to this quiet place, where a kind-hearted farmer gave him food and shelter. He lived simply, gentle as a child, when peace was on him, yet wild as the storm, when darkness returned. He would flee into the forest, running like a hunted animal among the trees. But if they could bring him home again and place before him the book of withered flowers, he would grow still as stone, turning the pages with trembling hands. Sometimes the tears would fall upon the faded petals, and he would smile faintly, as if greeting an old friend who had long been dead. None knew what he remembered then, only God. Now the book lay under his head as he slept his last sleep. Soon, they said, the lid would be nailed down, and he would have his quiet rest beneath the lilacs. We lifted the cloth. The face was peaceful, touched by sunlight filtering through the lilac leaves. A swallow flew in swift from the open air, wheeling under the arbor and crying its bright little song above the dead man's brow, as though it came to bid farewell. And we who stood there felt that strange stirring, known to every heart, when it opens the drawer of memory. Who has not, in some still hour, taken out old letters from youth and read them again? Those fragile sheets that smell faintly of long vanished summers. Suddenly the past lives again, the laughter, the sorrow, the faces that once were near. How many of those we swore never to forget have faded from our days, though they still breathe somewhere under the same sky? Life moves forward and carries us away, while the heart leaves its tokens pressed between the pages of time, like flowers once fresh, now pale and dry, yet still whispering of what was once alive. There, in the dead man's herbarium, lay an oak leaf, brittle now, brown and veined. It had been a gift from a friend of youth, a classmate from those bright years when every day seemed a promise. Together, in a green forest, they had sworn eternal friendship, and the leaf had been placed in the student's cap as a sign of that bond. The leaf remains, the friend is gone. The bond, broken, scattered like dust upon the road. Here was another relic, a hothouse blossom, pale and delicate from a distant land. Even now, after the passing of so many seasons, a faint perfume clung to it. A lady of noble birth had given it to him, they said, out of her garden, perhaps with a word, perhaps with a smile, that lived longer than the flower itself. Farther on lay a water lily, white as silence. That one he had plucked himself from a forest lake, on a day when sorrow lay heavy upon him. The lily's petals had been watered with his tears, and here, the sting of a nettle leaf, dry but cruel still. What memory had led his hand to gather it? Was it bitterness, regret, or the pain of a love betrayed? Only the dead man and his God could tell. There were lilies of the valley, faint bells from the shadowy woods where he once wandered alone. Honeysuckle taken from a tavern's windowsill, breathing the mingled scents of ale and longing. And even a sharp blade of grass, plain and poor, perhaps plucked in some moment of despair when beauty itself had turned away. Over all these relics the living lilacs bent, tender and fragrant, their blossoms brushing the still face below. The swallow darted again through the light, its cry clear and brief. Quivet, quivet, like a note of farewell. Then the men came with hammer and nails. The lid was lowered, the echo of the blows faded into the forest air. And there, under the lilacs, the old student lay in silence, his head resting upon the book of his days. The flowers of his life, gathered, pressed, and hidden, would now return to the earth, mingling with the roots of the lilac tree that bowed above him. Forgotten perhaps by men, yet remembered by the soil, by the wind, by the swallow that sings each spring above his grave. Hidden, yes, but not lost. For in every heart there lies some secret herbarium of its own, pages filled with flowers of memory, of friendship, of joy and pain, pressed between the hours of our lives, waiting for the hand that will one day turn them again in silence. The wind tells about Valdemar Daae and his daughters. When the wind sweeps over the grass, the blades of grass ripple like the water of a lake, and when it sweeps over the cornfield, the ears of corn curl into waves like those on a lake. This is the dance of the wind. But listen to him tell the story. He sings it out. And how different his song among the trees of the forest is from his shriek through the cracks, crannies, and crevices of old walls. Watch him chase the white, fleecy clouds across the sky like a flock of sheep. Notice how he howls through the open gate as if he were the watchman blowing his horn. Strangely, he whistles through the chimney until the fire on the hearth beneath blazes up, and it is pleasant and comfortable to sit in the chamber warmed by its glow and listen to stories. Let only the wind himself be the storyteller. He knows more wonderful tales than all the rest of us put together. Hear now how he tells the story. Hoo, 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 on, Daae, that is the theme of his song. Near the great belt there stands an old mansion with thick red walls, says the wind. I know every stone of those walls. I knew them in the olden days when they were part of Marsh castle on the promontory. They were torn down from there, but then they were built up again to form a new wall and a new mansion. This was Borreby Mansion, which stands to this day. I have seen and known all the noble men and women of many different families who have lived there. Now I shall tell you of Valdemar Daae and his daughters. He was a very proud man, for he was of royal blood. He knew more than how to hunt the stag or empty the jug. Everything will come out right, he used to say. His high-born wife walked daintily in her golden cloth garment over floors of polished mosaic. Magnificent tapestries and costly, beautifully carved furniture surrounded her. She had brought both silver and gold into the house. There was German beer in the cellar, proud black horses neighed in the stables. Borreby Mansion was then the home of wealth, and there were children, 3 fair daughters. I can still remember their names, Ede, Johanna, and Anna Dorothea. These were rich folk, noble folk, born and reared in luxury. Whew, whew, whew. On, on, sang the wind, and then continued his tale. Here I never saw, as in other old houses, the noble mistress turning the spinning wheel among her maidens in the great hall. She played upon the lute and sang, though not always the old Danish songs, but songs in foreign languages. There were life and gaiety here. Guests of distinction came from far and near. The sounds of music and the clinking of glasses were so loud that even I could not drown them. There was pride here, with boasting and bragging and talk of domination, but not the blessings of our Lord. Then there was one May Day even, said the wind, when I came upon it from the west. I had seen ships wrecked on the coast of West Jutland, had hunted over the heath and the green-wooded shore to Funen, and now I came over the great belt, blowing and roaring. I lay down for a rest on the coast of Zealand, quite near Borreby Mansion, where the beautiful forest of oaks still grew. The young lads of the neighborhood came out to the forest to collect the biggest and driest branches and twigs they could find. They carried them into the town, laid them in piles, set fire to them. Then the young men and girls sang as they danced around them. I lay still, said the wind, but then gently I just touched one of the branches that had been brought by the handsomest lad of them all, and immediately his pile of wood blazed up the highest. That meant he became the leader among them, with the privilege of choosing first one of the young girls to be his own May lamb. There was a joy, a merriment, such as I had never found in the rich Borreby mansion. Then there came driving toward the mansion, in a gilded carriage drawn by 6 horses, the noble lady herself with her 3 daughters, so young and so fair, 3 sweet blossoms, a rose, a lily, and a pale hyacinth. Their mother was like a proud, splendid tulip. No word of greeting did she have for the peasants, who stopped their game and bowed and scraped to her. Stiff as a tulip, she held herself. Yes, rose, lily, and pale hyacinth. I saw all 3. Whose May lambs would they become? One day, I wondered, surely their young men would be proud knights, perhaps even princes. Whoo, 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 on, on. So the carriage rattled past, and the peasants returned to their dance. Summer was being celebrated from one town to another, in Borreby, Cherreby, and all the towns around. But when I rose up that same night, the high-born lady had laid herself down, never to rise again. That had come to her which comes to all men. That is nothing new. Grave and thoughtful stood Valdemar Daae. He seemed to be saying, "The proudest tree may be bowed, but not broken." The daughters wept, and all eyes in the mansion had to be dried. Lady Daae had passed on, and I then passed on. Whew, whew, whew. I came again, as I often came across Funen and the waters of the belt, and rested near Borreby in the shelter of the beautiful oak forest. Here ospreys, wood pigeons, blue ravens, and even the black storks build their nests. It was the spring of the year, and some had eggs while others had even young ones. How they flew, how they cried. The sound of the axe could be heard, stroke after stroke. The trees were to be felled. Valdemar Daae had decided to build a ship, a great warship with 3 decks, which the king would surely buy. And for this the trees must fall, and the birds lose their homes. The hawk flew away in terror as his nest was destroyed. The osprey and all the other birds flew around in terrified anger, screaming of their wrath and agony. I could understand them well enough. The crows and jackdaws shrieked in scorn, caw, caw, from the nests. and in the middle of the forest with the workmen stood Valdemar, Daae, and his 3 daughters, and they all laughed at the wild protests of the birds, all but the youngest, Anna Dorothea. She was a tender-hearted child, and when an old, half-dead tree, on whose bare branches a black stork had built his nest, was to be cut down, it saddened her so to see the helpless young ones thrusting their heads out in the terror that she begged with tears in her eyes that this one tree be spared. So the tree with the black stork's nest was left standing. There was much hammering and sawing as the 3-deck ship was being built. The master shipbuilder was a fine-looking young fellow, though of lowly birth, his eyes sparkling with life and his brow thoughtful. Valdemar Daae liked to hear him talk, and so did little Ide, his eldest daughter, who was now 15 years old. And while he built the ship for her father, he built many a castle in the air besides, and saw himself and little Ide sitting there as man and wife. That might actually have come to pass if the castle had been of walled stone, with ramparts and moat, forest and gardens. But with all his skill, the builder was only a common bird, and what business did a sparrow have among a flock of cranes? Whoo, whoo, whoo! I flew away and he flew away, and little Ide forgot it, as forget she must. In the stable, the beautiful black horses neighed. They were worth looking at, and they were looked at. The admiral was sent by the king himself to inspect the new warship and to discuss buying it. He was loud in admiration for the splendid horses. "I heard him well," said the wind. "I followed the gentlemen through the open stable door and scattered about their feet wisps of straw, yellow as gold. Gold. That was what Valdemar Daae wanted, and the admiral wanted the black horses he admired so greatly, but all their discussion came to nothing. The horses weren't bought, and neither was the ship. It was left on the shore with planks over it, a Noah's Ark that was never to float on water. Whoo, whoo, whoo. It was a pity. In the winter, when the fields were covered with snow and ice floes choked the belt, said the wind, flocks of black ravens and crows came and perched on the lifeless, solitary ship as it stood on the shore. The frantic old birds and the homeless young ones screamed hoarse tales about the oak forest that had been ravished and the many wonderful nests that had been destroyed, all for the sake of this great piece of useless lumber, the proud vessel that was never to sail the seas. And I tossed and whirled the snow about until it lay thickly over the ship. I made it listen to my voice and taught it all that a storm has to say. I certainly did my part in teaching it all a ship should know of life. Whew, 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 on, on. And winter passed away. Winter and summer passed, as they always pass, as I pass, as the snow melts, as the leaf drifts downward, as the apple blossom fades, away, 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 and as people pass away. But the daughters were still young. Little Ide was still as blooming a rose as when the shipbuilder had seen her. Often I caught hold of her long brown hair when she stood thoughtfully beside the apple tree in the garden, and she didn't notice that I shook petals down on her hair, loosening it as she gazed at the crimson sunset and the streak of golden sky through the dark bushes and trees. Her sister Johanna was still like a lily, bright and slender, straight and tall, as stiff upon her stalk as her mother had been. She loved to linger in the great hall where the portraits of their ancestors hung. The ladies were painted wearing velvets and silk, with tiny pearl-embroidered hats set on their braids. They were beautiful ladies indeed. The men were shown in steel armor or in stiff white ruffs and rich mantles lined with squirrel fur, their swords belted to their sides, not around their waists. Johanna often wondered how her own portrait would look on those same walls and what her husband would look like. Yes, she thought about that and talked about it to herself. I heard it as I whipped through the long gallery into the hall and whirled around again. Anna Dorothea, the pale hyacinth, was still a very quiet child of 14, with large, thoughtful blue eyes, and the smile of childhood still lingering on her lips. Even if I could have, I would never have blown that smile away. I met her in the garden, in the narrow lane, or in the fields, gathering herbs and flowers for her father to use in the wondrous potions and mixtures he used to prepare. Valdemar Daae, though haughty and conceited, was also a man of skill and great knowledge. People knew that and spoke about it. Fire burned in summer as well as winter in the fireplace in his study. His chamber door was always locked. Night and day he worked, yet he seldom spoke of his labors. He knew that the secrets of nature must be wooed secretly, and he was seeking the best secret of all: how to produce pure red gold. The smoke therefore rose out of the chimney continuously, and the fire crackled as it burned. "I was there," sang the wind. I whistled up the chimney. "Stop it! Stop it!" I sang through the chimney. "It will all end in smoke, dust, embers, and ashes. You will burn yourself up. Whew! Whew! Stop it!" But Valdemar Daae did not stop. Those superb horses in the stable, what became of them? And the fine old gold and silver in cupboards and chests, the cattle in the meadows, the mansion and all its riches. Yes, they were all melted down in the gold-making crucible, and yet no gold came of it. Barn and granary, cellar and pantry, all were empty now. The house sheltered fewer folk and more mice. One window pane was broken, another cracked, said the wind, and now I had no need to go around to the door to get in. The chimney still smoked, to be sure, not for cooking dinner, but for cooking the red gold. I blew through the courtyard gates like the watchman blowing his horn, but there was no watchman here, said the wind. I whirled the weathercock round and round, and it creaked like the snoring of the watchman, but there was no watchman. Only rats and mice were there. Poverty loaded the table and stuffed wardrobe and larder. The doors sagged from their hinges. There were chinks and cracks in plenty, so that I could go in and out at will. In the smoke and ashes, beset by sorrow and sleepless nights, Valdemar's hair and beard turned gray, his skin grew coarse and yellowish, his eyes still looked greedily for gold, the long, hoped-for gold. I blew ashes and smoke into his face and beard. I whistled through the broken panes and open cracks and blew into the daughter's chest of drawers, where they kept their clothes, which now were faded and threadbare from constant use, but which had to last them. The poor dears never had such a song as this sung at their cradles, but none, save I, sang any song at all in the great hall now. The life of abundance had turned into one of poverty, said the wind. I snowed them in, and it is said that snow puts one in a good humor. They had no firewood, for the forest was destroyed. There came a sharp frost, and while I sprang through holes and passages and over walls and roofs to keep myself warm, the high-born daughters huddled in bed against the cold, and their father crept beneath a covering of rude skins. Nothing to eat, nothing to burn. It was a hard lesson they had to learn. Whew, 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 but Valdemar Daae couldn't learn. After winter comes the spring. he said, "and after troubles come the good times. We have only to wait, wait. Now the mansion is mortgaged. Now it is high time indeed, and so we shall have gold. By Easter, E." And then I saw him watching a spider at work, and heard him mutter, "Good, industrious little weaver, you teach me to persevere. Your web may be broken, but you only begin it again. Again it may be torn asunder, but all undismayed you return again and again to your work, and you are rewarded at last." Then Easter morning came, and the bells rang and the sun shone in the heavens. He had awakened in a feverish heat. He had boiled and seethed and distilled and compounded. I heard him sigh like a lost soul, and I heard him pray. I felt that he was holding his breath. The lamp had gone out, but he did not notice it. I blew on the coals until a flame shone on his chalk-white face and lighted up those staring eyes. But then those eyes became larger and larger, until they seemed about to burst. Behold the alchemistic glass. I glittered, glowing, pure and heavy. He lifted it with faltering hand. He cried with stumbling tongue, "Gold, gold." He staggered, dizzy, and I could have blown him down as he stood, said the wind. But I only blew on the live coals, then followed him through the door to where his daughters sat, shivering. Ashes sprinkled his beard, clung to his dress, and lay in his matted hair. He stood erect and lifted high his treasure in its fragile glass. "I've found it! I've won!" he cried. "Gold!" The glass flashed in the sunbeams as he held it high, and then, lo! His hand trembled so that the alchemistic glass fell to the floor and shivered into 1,000 fragments. His last bubble had burst. Whew, whew, whew. On, on, on. And I went on, away from the alchemist's home. Toward the end of that year, during the short days when the mist flings wet drops on the red berries and leafless branches, I came back in happy spirits, swept the heavens clean, and broke off the dead branches. That is not very hard work, to be sure, but it has to be done. And at the same time, there was a different sort of sweeping and cleaning out at Borreby Mansion. Valdemar Daae's old enemy, Ove Ramel of Basnice, was there with the mortgage on the mansion and all its contents. I drummed on the broken panes, beat against the ruined doors, and whistled through the cracks and chinks. Master Ove shouldn't find it pleasant to stay there. Edie and Anna Dorothea wept quietly. Johanna stood pale and stately and bit her thumb till it bled. But all that did no good. Ove Ramel generously offered to allow Mr. Daae to remain at the mansion during his lifetime, but he got no thanks for the gesture. I listened and noticed how the homeless old nobleman held his head more proudly than ever. I rushed against the mansion and the old lime trees so that the thickest branch broke off. And it wasn't a rotten one either. There it lay at the gate like a broom for sweeping out. And there was sweeping out there, you may be sure. But I had expected it. Oh, that was a day of bitterness, a sorrowful day. But with a stiff neck and a stout back, the proud man bore his burden bravely. They had nothing left except the clothes they wore and the new alchemistic glass, filled with the brittle treasure that had promised so much. The fool's gold scraped up from the floor, this Valdemar Daae hid in his breast. He took his cane in his hand, and with his 3 daughters, the once rich nobleman walked out of Borreby Mansion. I blew cold upon his flaming cheeks and stroked his gray beard and long white hair to and fro as I sang, as loudly as I could. Whew, 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 this was the end of his glory. Ide and Anne Dorothea walked on each side of him, But as Johanna crossed the threshold, she turned back. Perhaps as he gazed so wistfully at the red stones that had once made up Marsk-Stig's castle, she remembered the old ballad about Marsk-Stig's daughters. The elder took the younger by the hand, and forth they went to a distant land. Was she thinking of this song? Here were 3 daughters, and their father was with them. They turned off from the highway where they had used to drive in their carriage and made their way to Smidstrup Field, to a little shack of mud they had rented for 10 marks a year. These bare walls and empty chambers were their new mansion. Crows and jackdaws circled above their heads, screaming as if in mockery. Turned out of the nest, caw, caw, just as they had screamed in Borreby Wood when the oaks were being cut down. Mr. Daae and his daughters must have understood the cries. They were not pleasant to listen to, so I did my best to drown them out by blowing about their ears. Thus they passed into the shack of mud on Smidstrup Field, and I passed away over field and moor, through bare hedges and leafless woods, away over open waters, to other lands. Whoo, on, year after year. What happened to Valdemar Daae? What happened to his daughters? The wind will tell us. The last time I went to see them, I found only Anna Dorothea, the pale hyacinth. She was then old and bent. It was 100 years later. She had lived the longest. She knew the whole story. Across the heath, near the town of Viborg, there stood the dean's beautiful new house, with red stones and pointed gables and chimneys always smoking busily. The gentle lady and her beautiful daughters sat on the balcony and looked out over the hanging buckthorn in the garden, out to the brown heath. What did they look at there? They looked at the stork's nest on that dilapidated cottage out there. House leek and moss made up most of the roof, if one could call it a roof. The stork's nest covered the greater part of it, and that alone was in good condition, for the stork kept it that way. It was a house to look at but not to touch, said the wind. I had to pass by it very gently. The hut was left there only for the sake of the stork's nest, for it was certainly no credit to the heath. The dean didn't want to drive the stork away, so the poor old woman who had lived in the hut had permission to stay there and shelter herself as well as he could. For that she owed thanks to the queer Egyptian bird. Or was it because, so many years ago, she had pleaded for the nest of his wild black brother in Borreby Wood? Then she, the poor woman, was a happy child, a delicate, pale hyacinth in the garden of her ancestral home. She remembered it now. Anna Dorothea forgot nothing. Oh, she sighed. Yes, humans can sigh almost like the wind himself does among the reeds and rushes. Oh, there were no bells to ring at your funeral, Valdemar Daae. No groups of poor schoolboys sang psalms when Borreby's former master was laid to rest. Oh, but everything comes to an end, misery as well as happiness. It grieved my father worst of all that my sister Daae should become the wife of a peasant, a miserable peasant whom he could have punished by making him ride a hard plank. But he is at peace in the grave now, and you are with him, Ide. Oh, yes. Ah, me, I am still here. I am old and poor. Deliver me, kind Christ. Such was the prayer of Anna Dorothea in the miserable mud hut that was allowed to stand only for the sake of the stork. The boldest and most resolute of the 3 sisters I carried off myself, said the wind. She cut her clothes like a man's, disguised herself as a poor lad, and went into service as a sailor. She was sparing of speech, cross-looking, but quick at her work, although she couldn't climb the mast. So one night I blew her overboard before anyone found out she was a woman, and I think that was the right thing to do. It was another Easter morning, bright as that morning when Valdemar Daae thought he had found the gold. Among those tumble-down walls beneath the stork's nest, I could hear a faint voice chanting a psalm. It was Anna Dorothea's last hymn. There was no window with glass, only a hole in the wall, but the sun set itself there like a lump of gold. And as she gazed on its glory, her heart broke and her eyes grew fixed. The stork had given her shelter to the day of her death. I sang at her funeral, said the wind, as I had sung at her father's. I know where his grave is, and her grave, but no one else knows. Now there are new times, changed times. The old highway is lost in the fields, old cemeteries have been made into new roads, and soon the steam engine, with its row of cars, will come to rush over the forgotten graves of unknown ancestors. Whew, 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 on. And that's the story of Valdemar Daae and his daughters. Tell it better, you people, if you think you can, said the wind, then veered around. He was gone. Ole the Tower-Keeper. In the world it's always going up and down, and now I can't go up any higher. So said Ole the Tower-Keeper. Most people have to try both the ups and the downs, and rightly considered, we all get to be watchmen at last, and look down upon life from a height. Such was the speech of Ole, my friend, the old tower-keeper, a strange, talkative old fellow, who seemed to speak out everything that came into his head, and who for all that had many a serious thought deep in his heart. Yes, he was the child of respectable people, and there were even some who said that he was the son of a privy councillor, or that he might have been. He had studied, too, and had been assistant teacher and deputy clerk, but of what service was all that to him? In those days he lived in the clerk's house and was to have everything in the house to be at free quarters, as the saying is, but he was still, so to speak, a fine young gentleman. He wanted to have his boots cleaned with patent blacking, and the clerk could only afford ordinary grease, and upon that point they split. One spoke of stinginess, the other of vanity, and the blacking became the black cause of enmity between them, and at last they parted. This is what he demanded of the world in general, namely, patent blacking, and he got nothing but grease. Accordingly, he at last drew back from all men, and became a hermit. But the church tower is the only place in a great city where hermitage, office, and bread can be found together. So he betook himself up thither, and smoked his pipe as he made his solitary rounds. He looked upward and downward, and had his own thoughts, and told in his own way of what he read in books and in himself. I often lent him books, good books, and you may know by the company he keeps. He loved neither the English governess novels nor the French ones, which he called a mixture of empty wind and raisin stalks. He wanted biographies and descriptions of the wonders of the world. I visited him at least once a year, generally directly after New Year's Day, and then he always spoke of this and that which the change of the year had put into his head. I will tell the story of 3 of these visits, and will reproduce his own words whenever I can remember them. First visit. Among the books which I had lately lent Ole was one which had greatly rejoiced and occupied him. It was a geological book containing an account of the boulders. Yes, they're rare old fellows, those boulders, he said, and to think that we should pass them without noticing them. And over the street pavement, the paving stones, those fragments of the oldest remains of antiquity. One walks without ever thinking about them. I have done the very thing myself. But now I look respectfully at every paving stone. Many thanks for the book. It has filled me with thought and has made me long to read more on the subject. The romance of the earth is, after all, the most wonderful of all romances. It's a pity one can't read the first volume of it, because it is written in a language that we don't understand. One must read in the different strata, in the pebble stones, for each separate period. Yes, it is a romance, a very wonderful romance, and we all have our place in it. We grope and ferret about, and yet remain where we are. But the ball keeps turning, without emptying the ocean over us. The clod on which we move about holds and does not let us through. And then it's a story that has been acting for thousands upon thousands of years and is still going on. My best thanks for the book about the boulders. Those are fellows indeed. They could tell us something worth hearing if they only knew how to talk. It's really a pleasure now and then to become a mere nothing, especially when a man is as highly placed as I am. And then to think that we all, even with patent lacquer, are nothing more than insects of a moment on that ant-hill the earth, though we may be insects with stars and garters, places and offices. One feels quite a novice beside these venerable million-year-old boulders. On last New Year's Eve, I was reading the book and had lost myself in it so completely that I forgot my usual New Year's diversion, namely, the wild hunt to a Mac. Ah, you don't know what that is. The journey of the witches on broomsticks is well enough known. That journey is taken on St. John's Eve to the Brocken. But we have a wild journey, also, which is national and modern, and that is the journey to a Mac on the night of the New Year. All indifferent poets and poetesses, musicians, newspaper writers, and artistic notabilities. I mean those who are no good. Ride in the New Year's night through the air to a Mac. They sit backwards on their painting brushes or quill pens, for steel pens won't bear them. They're too stiff. As I told you, I see that every New Year's night, and could mention the majority of the riders by name, but I should not like to draw their enmity upon myself, for they don't like people to talk about their ride to a Mac on quill pens. I've a kind of niece who is a fishwife, and who, as she tells me, supplies 3 respectable newspapers with the terms of abuse and vituperation they use. And she has herself been at a Mac as an invited guest, but she was carried out thither, for she does not own a quill pen, nor can she ride. She has told me all about it. Half of what she said is not true, but the other half gives us information enough. When she was out there, the festivities began with a song. Each of the guests had written his own song, and each one sang his own song, for he thought that the best, and it was all one, all the same melody. Then those came marching up in little bands, who are only busy with their mouths. There were ringing bells that rang alternately, and then came the little drummers that beat their tattoo in the family circle. And acquaintance was made with those who write without putting their names, which here means as much as using grease instead of patent blacking. And then there was the beadle with his boy. And the boy was worst off, for in general he gets no notice taken of him. Then, too, there was the good street sweeper with his cart, who turns over the dustbin and calls it good, very good, remarkably good. Gee, and in the midst of the pleasure that was afforded by the mere meeting of these folks, there shot up out of the great dirt heap at a Mac a stem, a tree, an immense flower, a great mushroom, a perfect roof, which formed a sort of warehouse for the worthy company, for in it hung everything they had given to the world during the old year. Out of the tree poured sparks like flames of fire. These were the ideas and thoughts borrowed from others, which they had used, and which now got free and rushed away like so many fireworks. They played at the stick burns, and the young poets played at heartburns, and the witlings played off their jests, and the jests rolled away with a thundering sound, as if empty pots were being shattered against doors. It was very amusing, my niece said. In fact, she said many things that were very malicious, but very amusing. But I won't mention them, for a man must be good-natured and not a carping critic. But you will easily perceive that when a man once knows the rights of the journey to a Mac, as I know them, it's quite natural that on the New Year's night one should look out to see the wild chase go by. If in the new year I miss certain persons who used to be there, I am sure to notice others who are new arrivals. But this year I omitted taking my look at the guests. I bowled away on the boulders, rolled back through millions of years, and saw the stones break loose high up in the north, saw them drifting about on icebergs, long before Noah's Ark was constructed, saw them sink down to the bottom of the sea and reappear with a sandbank, with that one that peered forth from the flood and said, "This shall be Zealand." I saw them become the dwelling place of birds that are unknown to us, and then become the seat of wild chiefs of whom we know nothing, until with their axes they cut their runic signs into a few of these stones, which then came into the calendar of time. But as for me, I had gone quite beyond all lapse of time, and had become a cipher and a nothing. Then 3 or 4 beautiful falling stars came down, which cleared the air and gave my thoughts another direction. You know what a falling star is, do you not? The learned men are not at all clear about it. I have my own ideas about shooting stars, as the common people in many parts call them, and my idea is this. How often are silent thanksgivings offered up for one who has done a good and noble action? The thanks are often speechless, but they are not lost for all that. I think these thanks are caught up, and the sunbeams bring the silent, hidden thankfulness over the head of the benefactor. And if it be a whole people that has been expressing its gratitude through a long lapse of time, the thankfulness appears as a nosegay of flowers, and at length falls in the form of a shooting star over the good man's grave. I am always very much pleased when I see a shooting star, especially in the New Year's night, and then find out for whom the gift of gratitude was intended. Lately, a gleaming star fell in the southwest as a tribute of thanksgiving to many, many. For whom was that star intended, thought I. It fell, no doubt, on the hill by the bay of Plensburg, where the Danebrog waves over the graves of Schleppegrell, Laszlos, and their comrades. One star also fell in the midst of the land, fell upon sorrow, a flower on the grave of Holberg, the thanks of the year from a great many, thanks for his charming plays. It is a great and pleasant thought to know that a shooting star falls upon our graves. On mine, certainly none will fall. No sunbeam brings thanks to me, for here there is nothing worthy of thanks. I shall not get the patent lacquer, said Ole, for my fate on earth is only Greece, after all. Second visit. It was New Year's Day, and I went up on the tower. Ole spoke of the toasts that were drunk on the transition from the old year into the new, from one grave into the other, as he said. And he told me a story about the glasses, and this story had a very deep meaning. It was this. When on the New Year's night the clock strikes 12, The people at the table rise up with full glasses in their hands and drain these glasses and drink success to the new year. They begin the year with the glass in their hands. That is a good beginning for drunkards. They begin the new year by going to bed, and that's a good beginning for drones. Sleep is sure to play a great part in the new year, and the glass likewise. "Do you know what dwells in the glass?" asked Ole. "I will tell you. There dwell in the glass, first, health, and then pleasure, then the most complete sensual delight. And misfortune and the bitterest woe dwell in the glass also. Now, suppose we count the glasses. Of course, I count the different degrees in the glasses for different people. You see, the first glass, that's the glass of health, and in that the herb of health is found growing. Put it up on the beam in the ceiling, and at the end of the year you may be sitting in the arbor of health. If you take the second glass, from this a little bird soars upward, twittering in guileless cheerfulness, so that a man may listen to his song and perhaps join in. Fair is life, no downcast looks, take courage and march onward. Out of the third glass rises a little winged urchin, who cannot certainly be called an angel child, for there is goblin blood in his veins, and he has the spirit of a goblin, not wishing to hurt or harm you indeed, but very ready to play off tricks upon you. He'll sit at your ear and whisper merry thoughts to you. He'll creep into your heart and warm you, so that you grow very merry and become a wit, so far as the wits of the others can judge. In the fourth glass is neither herb, bird, nor urchin. In that glass is the pause drawn by reason, and one may never go beyond that sign. Take the fifth glass, and you will weep at yourself. You will feel such a deep emotion, or it will affect you in a different way. Out of the glass there will spring with a bang Prince Carnival, 9 times and extravagantly merry. He'll draw you away with him. You'll forget your dignity, if you have any, and you'll forget more than you should or ought to forget. All is dance, song, and sound. The masks will carry you away with them, and the daughters of vanity, clad in silk and satin, will come with loose hair and alluring charms, but tear yourself away if you can. The sixth glass. Yes, in that glass sits a demon, in the form of a little, well-dressed, attractive, and very fascinating man, who thoroughly understands you, agrees with you in everything, and becomes quite a second self to you. He has a lantern with him to give you light as he accompanies you home. There is an old legend about a saint who was allowed to choose one of the 7 deadly sins, and who accordingly chose drunkenness, which appeared to him the least, but which led him to commit all the other 6. The man's blood is mingled with that of the demon. It is the 6th glass, and with that the germ of all evil shoots up within us. And each one grows up with a strength like that of the grains of mustard seed, and shoots up into a tree, and spreads over the whole world. And most people have no choice but to go into the oven, to be recast in a new form. Gee, that's the history of the glasses, said the Tower-Keeper Ole, and it can be told with lacquer or only with grease, but I give it you with both. Third visit. On this occasion I chose the general moving day for my visit to Ole, for on that day it is anything but agreeable down in the streets in the town, for they are full of sweepings, shreds, and remnants of all sorts, to say nothing of the cast-off rubbish in which one has to wade about. But this time I happened to see 2 children playing in this wilderness of sweepings. They were playing at going to bed, for the occasion seemed especially favorable for this sport. They crept under the straw and drew an old bit of ragged curtain over themselves by way of coverlet. It was splendid, they said, but it was a little too strong for me, and besides, I was obliged to mount up on my visit to Ole. It's moving day today, he said. Streets and houses are like a dustbin, a large dustbin, but I'm content with a cartload. I may get something good out of that, and I really did get something good out of it once. Shortly after Christmas, I was going up the street. It was rough weather, wet and dirty. The right kind of weather to catch cold in. The dustman was there with his cart, which was full, and looked like a sample of streets on moving day. At the back of the cart stood a fir tree, quite green still, and with tinsel on its twigs. It had been used on Christmas Eve, and now it was thrown out into the street, and the dustman had stood it up at the back of his cart. It was droll to look at, or you may say it was mournful. All depends on what you think of when you see it. And I thought about it, and thought this and that of many things that were in the cart. Or I might have done so, and that comes to the same thing. There was an old lady's glove, too. I wonder what that was thinking of. Shall I tell you? The glove was lying there, pointing with its little finger at the tree. I'm sorry for the tree, it thought, and I was also at the feast, where the chandeliers glittered. My life was, so to speak, a ball night, a pressure of the hand, and I burst. My memory keeps dwelling upon that, and I have really nothing else to live for. This is what the glove thought, or what it might have thought. That's a stupid affair with yonder fir tree, said the potsherds. You see, potsherds think everything is stupid. When one is in the dust cart, they said, one ought not to give oneself airs and wear tinsel. I know that I have been useful in the world. Far more useful than such a green stick. This was a view that might be taken, and I don't think it quite a peculiar one. But for all that, the fir tree looked very well. It was like a little poetry in the dust heap, and truly there is dust enough in the streets on moving day. The way is difficult and troublesome then, and I feel obliged to run away out of the confusion. Or, if I am on the tower, I stay there and look down, and it is amusing enough. There are the good people below, playing at changing houses. They toil and tug away with their goods and chattels, and the household goblin sits in an old tub and moves with them. All the little griefs of the lodging and the family, and the real cares and sorrows, move with them out of the old dwelling into the new. And what gain is there for them or for us in the whole affair? Yes, there was written long ago the good old maxim, think on the great moving day of death. That is a serious thought. I hope it is not disagreeable to you that I should have touched upon it. Death is the most certain messenger, after all, in spite of his various occupations. Yes, death is the omnibus conductor, and he is the passport writer, and he countersigns our service book, and he is director of the savings bank of life. Do you understand me? All the deeds of our life, the great and the little alike, we put into this savings bank. And when death calls with his omnibus, and we have to step in and drive with him into the land of eternity, then on the frontier, he gives us our service book as a pass. As a provision for the journey, he takes this or that good deed we have done and lets it accompany us. And this may be very pleasant or very terrific. Nobody has ever escaped the omnibus journey. There is certainly a talk about one who was not allowed to go. They call him the Wandering Jew. He has to ride behind the omnibus. If he had been allowed to get in, he would have escaped the clutches of the poets. Just cast your mind's eye into that great omnibus. The society is mixed, for king and beggar, genius and idiot, sit side by side. They must go without their property and money. They have only the service book and the gift out of the savings bank with them. But which of our deeds is selected and given to us? Perhaps quite a little one that we have forgotten, but which has been recorded, small as a pea, but the pea can send out a blooming shoot. The poor bumpkin who sat on a low stool in the corner and was jeered at and flouted will perhaps have his worn-out stool given him as a provision, and the stool may become a litter in the land of eternity and rise up then as a throne, gleaming like gold and blooming as an arbor. He who always lounged about and drank the spiced draught of pleasure that he might forget the wild things he had done here will have his barrel given to him on the journey and will have to drink from it as they go on. And the drink is bright and clear, so that the thoughts remain pure, and all good and noble feelings are awakened. And he sees and feels what in life he could not or would not see. And then he has within him the punishment, the gnawing worm, which will not die through time incalculable. If on the glasses there stood written, Oblivion, on the barrel, Remembrance, is inscribed. When I read a good book, an historical work, I always think at last of the poetry of what I am reading, and of the omnibus of death, and wonder which of the hero's deeds death took out of the savings bank for him, and what provisions he got on the journey into eternity. There was once a French king. I have forgotten his name, for the names of good people are sometimes forgotten, even by me, but it will come back some day. There was a king who, during a famine, became the benefactor of his people, and the people raised up to his memory a monument of snow, with the inscription, "Quicker than this melts didst thou bring help." I fancy that death, looking back upon the monument, gave him a single snowflake as provision, a snowflake that never melts, and this flake floated over his royal head, like a white butterfly, into the land of eternity. Thus, too, there was Louis XIII. I have remembered his name, for one remembers what is bad. A trait of him often comes into my thoughts, and I wish one could say the story is not true. He had his Lord High Constable executed, and he could execute him, right or wrong. But he had the innocent children of the constable, one 7 and the other 8 years old, placed under the scaffold, so that the warm blood of their father spurted over them. And then he had them sent to the Bastille, and shut up in iron cages, where not even a coverlet was given them to protect them from the cold. And King Louis sent the executioner to them every week, and had a tooth pulled out of the head of each, that they might not be too comfortable. And the elder of the boys said, "My mother would die of grief if she knew that my younger brother had to suffer so cruelly. Therefore pull out 2 of my teeth, and spare him." The tears came into the hangman's eyes, but the king's will was stronger than the tears. And every week 2 little teeth were brought to him on a silver plate. He had demanded them, and he had them. I fancy that death took these 2 teeth out of the savings bank of life and gave them to Louis XIII to carry with him on the great journey into the land of immortality. They fly before him like 2 flames of fire. They shine and burn, and they bite him, the innocent children's teeth. Yes, that's a serious journey, the omnibus ride on the great moving day. And when is it to be undertaken? That's just the serious part of it. Any day, any hour, any minute, the omnibus may draw up. Which of our deeds will death take out of the savings bank and give to us as provision? Let us think of the moving day that is not marked in the calendar. The Old Bachelor's Nightcap. There is a street in Copenhagen with a very strange name. It is called Hisken Street. Where the name came from and what it means is very uncertain. It is said to be German, but that is unjust to the Germans, for it would then be called Hauschen, not Hisken. Hauschen means a little house, and for many years it consisted only of a few small houses, which were scarcely larger than the wooden booths we see in the marketplaces at fair time. They were perhaps a little higher and had windows, but the panes consisted of horn or bladder skins, for glass was then too dear to have glazed windows in every house. This was a long time ago, so long indeed that our grandfathers, and even great-grandfathers, would speak of those days as olden times. Indeed, many centuries have passed since then. The rich merchants in Bremen and Lübeck, who carried on trade in Copenhagen, did not reside in the town themselves, but sent their clerks, who dwelt in the wooden booths in the Hauschen Street, and sold beer and spices. The German beer was very good, and there were many sorts. From Bremen, Prussia, and Brunswick, and quantities of all sorts of spices, saffron, aniseed, ginger, and especially pepper. Indeed, pepper was almost the chief article sold here. So it happened at last that the German clerks in Denmark got their nickname of pepper gentry. It had been made a condition with these clerks that they should not marry, so that those who lived to be old had to take care of themselves, to attend to their own comforts, and even to light their own fires when they had any to light. Many of them were very aged, lonely old boys, with strange thoughts and eccentric habits. From this, all unmarried men who have attained a certain age are called in Denmark pepper gentry. And this must be remembered by all those who wish to understand the story. These pepper gentlemen, or as they are called in England, old bachelors, are often made a butt of ridicule. They are told to put on their nightcaps, draw them over their eyes, and go to sleep. The boys in Denmark make a song of it, thus: "Poor old bachelor, cut your wood, such a nightcap was never seen. Who would think it was ever clean? Go to sleep, it will do you good." So they sing about the pepper gentleman, so do they make sport of the poor old bachelor and his nightcap, and all because they really know nothing of either. It is a cap that no one need wish for or laugh at. And why not? Well, we shall hear in the story. In olden times, Hauschen Street was not paved, and passengers would stumble out of one hole into another, as they generally do in unfrequented highways. And the street was so narrow, and the booths leaning against each other were so close together, that in the summertime a sail would be stretched across the street from one booth to another opposite. At these times the odor of the pepper, saffron, and ginger became more powerful than ever. Behind the counter, as a rule, there were no young men. The clerks were almost all old boys, but they did not dress as we are accustomed to see old men represented, wearing wigs, nightcaps, and knee breeches, and with coat and waistcoat buttoned up to the chin. We have seen the portraits of our great-grandfathers dressed in this way, but the pepper gentlemen had no money to spare to have their portraits taken, though one of them would have made a very interesting picture for us now if taken as he appeared standing behind his counter or going to church or on holidays. On these occasions they wore high-crowned, broad-brimmed hats, and sometimes a younger clerk would stick a feather in his. The woolen shirt was concealed by a broad linen collar. The close jacket was buttoned up to the chin, and the cloak hung loosely over it. The trousers were tucked into the broad, tipped shoes, for the clerks wore no stockings. They generally stuck a table knife and spoon in their girdles, as well as a larger knife, as a protection to themselves, and such a weapon was often very necessary. After this fashion was Anthony dressed on holidays and festivals, excepting that, instead of a high-crowned hat, he wore a kind of bonnet, and under it a knitted cap, a regular nightcap, to which he was so accustomed that it was always on his head. He had two nightcaps, not heads. Anthony was one of the oldest of the clerks, and just the subject for a painter. He was as thin as a lath, wrinkled round the mouth and eyes, had long bony fingers, bushy gray eyebrows, and over his left eye hung a thick tuft of hair, which did not look handsome, but made his appearance very remarkable. People knew that he came from Bremen. It was not exactly his home, although his master resided there. His ancestors were from Thuringia and had lived in the town of Eisenach, close by Wartburg. Old Anthony seldom spoke of this place, but he thought of it all the more. The old clerks of Hauschen Street very seldom met together. Each one remained in his own booth, which was closed early enough in the evening, and then it looked dark and dismal out in the street. Only a faint glimmer of light struggled through the horn panes in the little window on the roof, while within sat the old clerk, generally on his bed, singing his evening hymn in a low voice. Or he would be moving about in his booth till late in the night, busily employed in many things. It certainly was not a very lively existence. To be a stranger in a strange land is a bitter lot. No one notices you unless you happen to stand in their way. Often, when it was dark night outside, with rain or snow falling, the place looked quite deserted and gloomy. There were no lamps in the street, excepting a very small one, which hung at one end of the street before a picture of the Virgin, which had been painted on the wall. The dashing of the water against the bulwarks of a neighboring castle could plainly be heard. Such evenings are long and dreary, unless people can find something to do. And so Anthony found it. There were not always things to be packed or unpacked, nor paper bags to be made, nor the scales to be polished. So Anthony invented employment. He mended his clothes and patched his boots, and when he at last went to bed, his nightcap, which he had worn from habit, still remained on his head. He had only to pull it down a little farther over his forehead. Very soon, however, it would be pushed up again to see if the light was properly put out. He would touch it, press the wick together, and at last pull his nightcap over his eyes and lie down again on the other side. But often there would arise in his mind a doubt as to whether every coal had been quite put out in the little fire pan in the shop below. If even a tiny spark had remained, it might set fire to something and cause great damage. Then he would rise from his bed, creep down the ladder, for it could scarcely be called a flight of stairs, and when he reached the fire pan, not a spark could be seen, so he had just to go back again to bed. But often, when he had got halfway back, he would fancy the iron shutters of the door were not properly fastened, and his thin legs would carry him down again. And when at last he crept into bed, he would be so cold that his teeth chattered in his head. He would draw the coverlet closer round him, pull his nightcap over his eyes, and try to turn his thoughts from trade and from the labors of the day to olden times. But this was scarcely an agreeable entertainment, for thoughts of olden memories raise the curtains from the past, and sometimes pierce the heart with painful recollections, till the agony brings tears to the waking eyes. And so it was with Anthony. Often the scalding tears, like pearly drops, would fall from his eyes to the coverlet and roll on the floor with a sound as if one of his heartstrings had broken. Sometimes, with a lurid flame, memory would light up a picture of life which had never faded from his heart. If he dried his eyes with his nightcap, then the tear and the picture would be crushed. But the source of the tears remained and welled up again in his heart. The pictures did not follow one another in order, as the circumstances they represented had occurred. Very often the most painful would come together, and when those came, which were most full of joy, they had always the deepest shadow thrown upon them. The beech woods of Denmark are acknowledged by everyone to be very beautiful, but more beautiful still in the eyes of old Anthony were the beech woods in the neighborhood of Wartburg. More grand and venerable to him seemed the old oaks around the proud baronial castle, where the creeping plants hung over the stony summits of the rocks. Sweeter was the perfume there of the apple blossom than in all the land of Denmark. How vividly were represented to him, in a glittering tear that rolled down his cheek, two children at play, a boy and a girl. The boy had rosy cheeks, golden ringlets, and clear blue eyes. He was the son of Anthony, a rich merchant. It was himself. The little girl had brown eyes and black hair and was clever and courageous. She was the mayor's daughter, Molly. The children were playing with an apple. They shook the apple and heard the pips rattling in it. Then they cut it in two, and each of them took half. They also divided the pips and ate all but one, which the little girl proposed should be placed in the ground. "You will see what will come out," she said. "Something you don't expect. A whole apple tree will come out, but not directly." Then they got a flower pot, filled it with earth, and were soon both very busy and eager about it. The boy made a hole in the earth with his finger, and the little girl placed the pip in the hole, and then they both covered it over with earth. "Now you must not take it out tomorrow to see if it has taken root," said Molly. "No one ever should do that. I did so with my flowers, but only twice. I wanted to see if they were growing. I didn't know any better then, and the flowers all died." Little Anthony kept the flower pot, and every morning during the whole winter he looked at it, but there was nothing to be seen but black earth. At last, however, the spring came, and the sun shone warm again, and then two little green leaves sprouted forth in the pot. "They are Molly and me," said the boy. "How wonderful they are, and so beautiful." Very soon a third leaf made its appearance. "Who does that stand for?" thought he, and then came another and another, day after day, and week after week, till the plant became quite a tree. And all this about the two children was mirrored to old Anthony in a single tear, which could soon be wiped away and disappear, but might come again from its source in the heart of the old man. In the neighborhood of Eisenach stretches a ridge of stony mountains, one of which has a rounded outline, and shows itself above the rest without tree, bush, or grass on its barren summits. It is called the Venus Mountain, and the story goes that the Lady Venus, one of the heathen goddesses, keeps house there. She is also called Lady Halla, as every child round Eisenach well knows. She it was who enticed the noble knight Tannhauser the minstrel from the circle of singers at Wartburg into her mountain. Little Molly and Anthony often stood by this mountain, and one day Molly said, "Do you dare to knock and say, 'Lady Halla, open the door, Tannhauser is here'?" But Anthony did not dare. Molly, however, did, though she only said the words, Lady Halla, loudly and distinctly. The rest she muttered so much under her breath that Anthony felt certain she had really said nothing. And yet she looked quite bold and saucy, just as she did sometimes when she was in the garden with a number of other little girls. They would all stand round him together and want to kiss him, because he did not like to be kissed, and pushed them away. Then Molly was the only one who dared to resist him. "I may kiss him," she would say proudly, as she threw her arms round his neck. She was vain of her power over Anthony, for he would submit quietly and think nothing of it. Molly was very charming, but rather bold. And how she did tease! They said Lady Halla was beautiful, but her beauty was that of a tempting fiend. Saint Elizabeth, the tutelar saint of the land, the pious princess of Thuringia, whose good deeds have been immortalized in so many places through stories and legends, had greater beauty and more real grace. Her picture hung in the chapel, surrounded by silver lamps. But it did not in the least resemble Molly. The apple tree, which the two children had planted, grew year after year, till it became so large that it had to be transplanted into the garden, where the dew fell and the sun shone warmly. And there it increased in strength so much as to be able to withstand the cold of winter. And after passing through the severe weather, it seemed to put forth its blossoms in spring for very joy that the cold season had gone. In autumn, it produced 2 apples, one for Molly and one for Anthony. It could not well do less. The tree, after this, grew very rapidly, and Molly grew with the tree. She was as fresh as an apple blossom, but Anthony was not to behold this flower for long. All things change. Molly's father left his old home, and Molly went with him far away. In our time, it would be only a journey of a few hours, but then it took more than a day and a night to travel so far eastward from Eisenbach to a town still called Weimar, on the borders of Thuringia. And Molly and Anthony both wept, but these tears all flowed together into one tear which had the rosy shimmer of joy. Molly had told him that she loved him more than all the splendors of Weimar. 1, 2, 3 years went by, and during the whole time he received only 2 letters. One came by the carrier, and the other a traveler brought. The way was very long and difficult, with many turnings and windings through towns and villages. How often had Anthony and Molly heard the story of Tristan and Isolde, and Anthony had thought the story applied to him, although Tristan means born in sorrow, which Anthony certainly was not. Nor was it likely he would ever say of Molly as Tristan said of Isolde, "She has forgotten me." But in truth, Isolde had not forgotten him, her faithful friend. And when both were laid in their graves, one on each side of the church, the linden trees that grew by each grave spread over the roof, and bending towards each other, mingled their blossoms together. Anthony thought it a very beautiful but mournful story, yet he never feared anything so sad would happen to him. And Molly, as he passed the spot, whistling the air of a song composed by the minstrel Walter, called the Willow Bird, beginning, "Under the linden trees, out on the heath." One stanza pleased him exceedingly. "Through the forest and in the vale, sweetly warbles the nightingale." This song was often in his mouth, and he sung or whistled it on a moonlight night, when he rode on horseback along the deep, hollow way on his road to Weimar to visit Molly. He wished to arrive unexpectedly, and so indeed he did. He was received with a hearty welcome and introduced to plenty of grand and pleasant company, where overflowing wine cups were passed about. A pretty room and a good bed were provided for him, and yet his reception was not what he had expected and dreamed it would be. He could not comprehend his own feelings, nor the feelings of others. But it is easily understood how a person can be admitted into a house or a family without becoming one of them. We converse in company with those we meet, as we converse with our fellow travelers in a stage coach on a journey. We know nothing of them, and perhaps all the while we are incommoding one another, and each is wishing himself or his neighbor away. Something of this kind Anthony felt when Molly talked to him of old times. "I am a straightforward girl," she said, "and I will tell you myself how it is. There have been great changes since we were children together. Everything is different, both inwardly and outwardly. We cannot control our wills, nor the feelings of our hearts, by the force of custom. Anthony, I would not, for the world, make an enemy of you when I am far away. Believe me, I entertain for you the kindest wishes in my heart, but to feel for you what I now know can be felt for another man, can never be. You must try and reconcile yourself to this. Farewell, Anthony." Anthony also said, "Farewell." Not a tear came into his eye. He felt he was no longer Molly's friend. Hot iron and cold iron alike take the skin from our lips, and we feel the same sensation if we kiss either. And Anthony's kiss was now the kiss of hatred, as it had once been the kiss of love. Within 24 hours, Anthony was back again to Eisenach, though the horse that he rode was entirely ruined. "What matters it?" said he. "I am ruined also. I will destroy everything that can remind me of her, or of Lady Halla, or Lady Venus, the heathen woman. I will break down the apple tree and tear it up by the roots. Never more shall it blossom or bear fruit." The apple tree was not broken down, for Anthony himself was struck with a fever, which caused him to break down and confined him to his bed. But something occurred to raise him up again. What was it? A medicine was offered to him, which he was obliged to take. A bitter remedy, at which the sick body and the oppressed spirit alike shuddered. Anthony's father lost all his property, and from being known as one of the richest merchants, he became very poor. Dark days, heavy trials, with poverty at the door, came rolling into the house upon them like the waves of the sea. Sorrow and suffering deprived Anthony's father of his strength, so that he had something else to think of. Besides nursing his love sorrows and his anger against Molly, he had to take his father's place, to give orders, to act with energy, to help, and, at last, to go out into the world and earn his bread. Anthony went to Bremen, and there he learnt what poverty and hard living really were. These things often harden the character, but sometimes soften the heart, even too much. How different the world, and the people in it, appeared to Anthony now, to what he had thought in his childhood. What to him were the minstrel's songs? An echo of the past, sounds long vanished. At times he would think in this way, yet again and again, the songs would sound in his soul, and his heart become gentle and pious. "God's will is the best," he would then say. "It was well that I was not allowed to keep my power over Molly's heart, and that she did not remain true to me. How I should have felt it now, when fortune has deserted me. She left me before she knew of the change in my circumstances, or had a thought of what was before me. That is a merciful providence for me. All has happened for the best. She could not help it, and yet I have been so bitter and in such enmity against her. Years passed by. Anthony's father died, and strangers lived in the old house. He had seen it once again since then. His rich master sent him journeys on business, and on one occasion his way led him to his native town of Eisenach. The old Wartburg castle stood unchanged on the rock where the monk and the nun were hewn out of the stone. The great oaks formed an outline to the scene which he so well remembered in his childhood. The Venus Mountain stood out gray and bare, overshadowing the valley beneath. He would have been glad to call out, Lady Halla, unlock the mountain. I would fain remain here always in my native soil." Oh, that was a sinful thought, and he offered a prayer to drive it away. Then a little bird in the thickets sang out clearly, and old Anthony thought of the minstrel's song. How much came back to his remembrance as he looked through the tears once more on his native town. The old house was still standing as in olden times, but the garden had been greatly altered. A pathway led through a portion of the ground, and outside the garden and beyond the path stood the old apple tree, which he had not broken down, although he talked of doing so in his trouble. The sun still threw its rays upon the tree, and the refreshing dew fell upon it as of old, and it was so overloaded with fruit that the branches bent towards the earth with the weight. "That flourishes still," said he as he gazed. One of the branches of the tree had, however, been broken. Mischievous hands must have done this in passing, for the tree now stood in a public thoroughfare. "The blossoms are often plucked," said Anthony. "The fruit is stolen, and the branches broken without a thankful thought of their profusion and beauty. It might be said of a tree, as it has been said of some men. It was not predicted at his cradle that he should come to this. How brightly began the history of this tree, and what is it now? Forsaken and forgotten, in a garden by a hedge in a field, and close to a public road. There it stands, unsheltered, plundered, and broken. It certainly has not yet withered, but in the course of years, the number of blossoms from time to time will grow less, and at last it will cease altogether to bear fruit, and then its history will be over." Such were Anthony's thoughts as he stood under the tree, and during many a long night as he lay in his lonely chamber in the wooden house in Hauschen Street, Copenhagen, in the foreign land to which the rich merchant of Bremen, his employer, had sent him on condition that he should never marry. Marry! Ha! Ha! And he laughed bitterly to himself at the thought. Winter one year set in early, and it was freezing hard. Without, a snowstorm made everyone remain at home who could do so. Thus it happened that Anthony's neighbors, who lived opposite to him, did not notice that his house remained unopened for 2 days, and that he had not showed himself during that time, for who would go out in such weather unless he were obliged to do so? They were gray, gloomy days, and in the house, whose windows were not glass, twilight and dark nights reigned in turns. During these 2 days, old Anthony had not left his bed. He had not the strength to do so. The bitter weather had for some time affected his limbs. There lay the old bachelor, forsaken by all, and unable to help himself. He could scarcely reach the water jug that he had placed by his bed, and the last drop was gone. It was not fever nor sickness, but old age that had laid him low. In the little corner where his bed lay, he was overshadowed, as it were, by perpetual night. A little spider, which he could, however, not see, busily and cheerfully spun its web above him, so that there should be a kind of little banner waving over the old man when his eyes closed. The time passed slowly and painfully. He had no tears to shed, and he felt no pain. No thought of Molly came into his mind. He felt as if the world was now nothing to him, as if he were lying beyond it, with no one to think of him. Now and then he felt slight sensations of hunger and thirst, but no one came to him, no one tended him. He thought of all those who had once suffered from starvation, of Saint Elizabeth, who once wandered on the earth, the saint of his home and his childhood, the noble Duchess of Thuringia, that highly esteemed lady who visited the poorest villages, bringing hope and relief to the sick inmates. The recollection of her pious deeds was as light to the soul of poor Anthony. He thought of her as she went about speaking words of comfort, binding up the wounds of the afflicted and feeding the hungry, although often blamed for it by her stern husband. He remembered a story told of her, that on one occasion when she was carrying a basket full of wine and provisions, her husband, who had watched her footsteps, stepped forward and asked her angrily what she carried in her basket, whereupon, with fear and trembling, she answered, "Roses, which I have plucked from the garden." Then he tore away the cloth which covered the basket, and what could equal the surprise of the pious woman, to find that by a miracle everything in her basket, the wine, the bread, had all been changed into roses. In this way the memory of the kind lady dwelt in the calm mind of Anthony. She was as a living reality in his little dwelling in the Danish land. He uncovered his face that he might look into her gentle eyes, while everything around him changed from its look of poverty and want to a bright rose tint. The fragrance of roses spread through the room, mingled with the sweet smell of apples. He saw the branches of an apple tree spreading above him. It was the tree which he and Molly had planted together. The fragrant leaves of the tree fell upon him and cooled his burning brow. Upon his parched lips they seemed like refreshing bread and wine, and as they rested on his breast, a peaceful calm stole over him, and he felt inclined to sleep. "I shall sleep now," he whispered to himself. "Sleep will do me good. In the morning I shall be upon my feet again, strong and well, glorious, wonderful. That apple tree planted in love now appears before me in heavenly beauty." And he slept. The following day, the third day during which his house had been closed, the snowstorm ceased. Then his opposite neighbor stepped over to the house in which old Anthony lived, for he had not yet showed himself. There he lay stretched on his bed, dead, with his old nightcap tightly clasped in his two hands. The nightcap, however, was not placed on his head in his coffin. He had a clean white one on then. Where now were the tears he had shed? What had become of those wonderful pearls? They were in the nightcap still. Such tears as these cannot be washed out, even when the nightcap is forgotten. The old thoughts and dreams of a bachelor's nightcap still remain. Never wish for such a nightcap. It would make your forehead hot, cause your pulse to beat with agitation, and conjure up dreams which would appear realities. The first who wore old Anthony's cap felt the truth of this, though it was half a century afterwards. That man was the mayor himself, who had already made a comfortable home for his wife and 11 children by his industry. The moment he put the cap on, he dreamed of unfortunate love, of bankruptcy, and of dark days. "Hello, how the nightcap burns!" he exclaimed as he tore it from his bead. Then a pearl rolled out, and then another, and they glittered and sounded as they fell. What can this be? Is it paralysis, or something dazzling my eyes? They were the tears which old Anthony had shed half a century before. To everyone who afterwards put this cap on his head came visions and dreams which agitated him not a little. His own history was changed into that of Anthony till it became quite a story, and many stories might be made by others, so we will leave them to relate their own. We have told the first, and our last word is, don't wish for a bachelor's nightcap. Heartache. The little history I am about to tell is, as so many are, divided into two unequal halves. The first might easily be omitted by the impatient listener, and yet without it, the second would seem almost too abrupt, too bare of meaning. So let us begin at the beginning, where all things truly begin. Quietly, unassumingly, without the faintest hint of the sorrow that lies waiting beyond the turn of the page. We were residing at a country manor, a stately old house with whitewashed walls and tall windows that caught the afternoon sun. Its owner, a gentleman of distinction, had been called away for a few days on business. The air was heavy with the smell of summer fields and tanned leather, for the nearby town was known for its tanneries. And so it happened that one morning a lady arrived from that very town, a plump, courteous widow with a nervous little pug dog tucked beneath her arm. She came, she explained, to settle a matter of property, shares in her late husband's tannery, and had brought with her the certificates, neatly folded and tied with blue ribbon. She was a woman of order, of tidy habits and small anxieties. We, wishing to assist, advised her to seal the papers in an envelope, write upon it the title and address of the proprietor of the estate, General War Commissary Knight, and so forth, and leave it in our keeping until the master's return. The lady agreed at once, but as she took up the pen and dipped it in ink, her hand trembled slightly. "Be so kind," she said softly, "as to repeat the address once more." Slowly. We complied. She wrote, her brow wrinkling with care, until midway through General War. She stopped, sighed deeply, and said with a little half-laugh, half-sigh, "Ah, but I'm only a woman." While she wrote, her Puggy, had been placed on the floor. He did not like it. He was a round-bodied creature with a blunt nose and folds of velvet skin along his back, and he expressed his displeasure by growling in a manner that was more comical than fierce. "He doesn't bite," said the widow. "Poor soul, he hasn't a tooth in his head. He's like one of the family, faithful but bad-tempered, though that's no fault of his own. My grandchildren tease him, you see. They play wedding, and he must be bridesmaid, dressed up in lace and ribbons. It's all too much for the old gentleman." She sealed her envelope, took up Puggy again, with a tenderness one reserves for a frail child, and departed in her little carriage. That was the end of the first part of the story. The part, as I said, which might well have been left untold. A week later, the second part began. We arrived in the same town and lodged at a small inn whose windows overlooked the tannery yard. The place was divided by a high wooden fence. On one side were raw hides, brown and stiff, stretched across racks to dry in the sun, and on the other were neat piles of finished leather, soft and yellow as parchment. The air was thick with the sharp, sour odor of tanning, a smell that spoke of labor and livelihood. That morning, poor Puggy had died. The widow's grandchildren, for he had never married, were preparing his funeral in the far corner of the yard. They were earnest about it, as children are about all ceremonies of their own invention. They dug a little grave and bordered it carefully with broken flower pots. They filled it with clean sand and at its head planted an empty beer bottle neck upwards. Not symbolic, perhaps, but proudly ornamental in their eyes. When all was ready, they danced around the grave. Then the eldest boy, a practical fellow of 7 with a shock of yellow hair, proposed an idea. "Let's have an exhibition," he said. "Let's show Puggy's grave to everyone on the street. Admission, 1 trouser button." It was a fine plan, and the others clapped in agreement. Buttons, after all, were universal currency. Each boy had at least 1 to spare, and if not, could borrow from his suspenders. Before long, the narrow street was filled with visitors. Boys and girls came running, each paying his button at the gate. Some went home, afterward with only 1 suspender to hold their trousers, but they did not mind. They had seen Puggy's grave, and that was a sight worth any price. Outside the gate, however, stood one child who did not enter. She was a little girl, poorly dressed but strikingly lovely, with tangled golden curls and eyes of the clearest blue, eyes that seemed to hold all the brightness of a morning sky after rain. She said nothing, merely watched as the others went in and out, her lips pressed together, her small hands clasped before her. She had no button. She knew it, and said not a word. When the last visitor had left and the laughter had faded into the alley, she crept to the gate, peered in once more, and then sat down on the ground. There, with her thin brown fingers covering her face, she began to sob. Softly at first, then with the deep, helpless grief only a child can feel. She had not seen Puggy's grave. To her it was a loss vast and terrible, a sorrow as real as any that weighs upon grown hearts. We watched from above, from the window of our room at the inn. And as so often happens when we look down upon the small tragedies of life, we smiled. For from such a distance, be it from a window or from years gone by, sorrow itself takes on a strange gentleness, almost a beauty. That, dear reader, is the whole of the tale. Whoever fails to understand it may go and buy a share in the widow's tannery, for the price of comprehension, like the price of admission, is small, yet few are willing to pay it. The Goblin and the Huckster. There was once a regular student who lived in a garret and had no possessions, and there was also a regular huckster to whom the house belonged, and who occupied the ground floor. A goblin lived with the huckster, because at Christmas he always had a large dish full of jam, with a great piece of butter in the middle. The huckster could afford this, and therefore the goblin remained with the huckster, which was very cunning of him. One evening, the student came into the shop through the back door to buy candles and cheese for himself. He had no one to send, and therefore he came himself. He obtained what he wished, and then the huckster and his wife nodded good evening to him, and she was a woman who could do more than merely nod, for she had usually plenty to say for herself. The student nodded in return as he turned to leave, then suddenly stopped and began reading the piece of paper in which the cheese was wrapped. It was a leaf torn out of an old book, a book that ought not to have been torn up, for it was full of poetry. "Yonder lies some more of the same sort," said the huckster. "I gave an old woman a few coffee berries for it. You shall have the rest for 6 pence, if you will." "Indeed I will," said the student. Give me the book instead of the cheese. I can eat my bread and butter without cheese. It would be a sin to tear up a book like this. You are a clever man and a practical man, but you understand no more about poetry than that cask yonder." This was a very rude speech, especially against the cask, but the huckster and the student both laughed, for it was only said in fun. But the goblin felt very angry that any man should venture to say such things to a huckster who was a householder and sold the best butter. As soon as it was night and the shop closed, and everyone in bed except the student, the goblin stepped softly into the bedroom where the huckster's wife slept and took away her tongue, which, of course, she did not then want. Whatever object in the room he placed his tongue upon immediately received voice and speech, and was able to express its thoughts and feelings as readily as the lady herself could do. It could only be used by one object at a time, which was a good thing, as a number speaking at once would have caused great confusion. The goblin laid the tongue upon the cask, in which lay a quantity of old newspapers. "Is it really true," he asked, "that you do not know what poetry is?" "Of course I know," replied the cask. "Poetry is something that always stands in the corner of a newspaper and is sometimes cut out, and I may venture to affirm that I have more of it in me than the student has, and I am only a poor tub of the hucksters." Then the goblin placed the tongue on the coffee mill, and how it did go to be sure. Then he put it on the butter tub and the cash box, and they all expressed the same opinion as the waste paper tub, and a majority must always be respected. "Now I shall go and tell the student," said the goblin, and with these words he went quietly up the back stairs to the garret where the student lived. He had a candle burning still, and the goblin peeped through the keyhole and saw that he was reading in the torn book, which he had brought out of the shop. But how light the room was! From the book shot forth a ray of light which grew broad and full, like the stem of a tree, from which bright rays spread upward and over the student's head. Each leaf was fresh, and each flower was like a beautiful female head, some with dark and sparkling eyes, and others with eyes that were wonderfully blue and clear. The fruit gleamed like stars, and the room was filled with sounds of beautiful music. The little goblin had never imagined, much less seen or heard of, any sight so glorious as this. He stood still on tiptoe, peeping in, till the light went out in the garret. The student no doubt had blown out his candle and gone to bed, but the little goblin remained standing there. Nevertheless, and listening to the music which still sounded on, soft and beautiful, a sweet cradle song for the student who had lain down to rest. "This is a wonderful place," said the goblin. "I never expected such a thing. I should like to stay here with the student." And the little man thought it over, for he was a sensible little spirit. At last he sighed. "But the student has no jam, Daae." So he went downstairs again into the huckster's shop, and it was a good thing he got back when he did, for the cask had almost worn out the lady's tongue. He had given a description of all that he contained on one side, and was just about to turn himself over to the other side to describe what was there, when the goblin entered and restored the tongue to the lady. But from that time forward, the whole shop, from the cash box down to the pine wood logs, formed their opinions from that of the cask, and they all had such confidence in him and treated him with so much respect that when the huckster read the criticisms on theatricals and art of an evening, they fancied it must all come from the cask. But after what he had seen, The goblin could no longer sit and listen quietly to the wisdom and understanding downstairs. So, as soon as the evening light glimmered in the garret, he took courage, for it seemed to him as if the rays of light were strong cables, drawing him up and obliging him to go and peep through the keyhole. And while there, a feeling of vastness came over him, such as we experience by the ever-moving sea when the storm breaks forth, and it brought tears into his eyes. He did not himself know why he wept, yet a kind of pleasant feeling mingled with his tears. How wonderfully glorious it would be to sit with the student under such a tree! But that was out of the question. He must be content to look through the keyhole and be thankful for even that. There he stood on the old landing, with the autumn wind blowing down upon him through the trap door. It was very cold, but the little creature did not really feel it, till the light in the garret went out, and the tones of music died away. Then, how he shivered, and crept downstairs again to his warm corner, where it felt homelike and comfortable. And when Christmas came again, and brought the dish of jam and the great lump of butter, he liked the huckster best of all. Soon after, in the middle of the night, the goblin was awoke by a terrible noise, and knocking against the window, shutters, and the house doors, and by the sound of the watchman's horn. For a great fire had broken out, and the whole street appeared full of flames. Was it in their house or a neighbor's? No one could tell, for terror had seized upon all. The huckster's wife was so bewildered that she took her gold earrings out of her ears and put them in her pocket, that she might save something at least. The huckster ran to get his business papers, and the servant resolved to save her blue silk mantle, which she had managed to buy. Each wished to keep the best things they had. The goblin had the same wish, for with one spring he was upstairs and in the student's room, whom he found standing by the open window and looking quite calmly at the fire, which was raging at the house of a neighbor opposite. The goblin caught up the wonderful book which lay on the table and popped it into his red cap, which he held tightly with both hands. The greatest treasure in the house was saved, and he ran away with it to the roof and seated himself on the chimney. The flames of the burning house opposite illuminated him as he sat, both hands pressed tightly over his cap, in which the treasure lay. And then he found out what feelings really reigned in his heart, and knew exactly which way they tended. And yet, when the fire was extinguished, and the goblin again began to reflect, he hesitated, and said at last, "I must divide myself between the two. I cannot quite give up the huckster because of the jam." And this is a representation of human nature. We are like the goblin. We all go to visit the huckster because of the jam. Something. I mean to be somebody and do something useful in the world, said the eldest of 5 brothers. I don't care how humble my position is, so that I can only do some good, which will be something. I intend to be a brickmaker. Bricks are always wanted, and I shall be really doing something. Your something is not enough for me, said the second brother. What you talk of doing is nothing at all. It is journeyman's work, or might even be done by a machine. No, I should prefer to be a builder at once. There is something real in that. A man gains a position. He becomes a citizen, has his own sign, his own house of call for his workmen. So I shall be a builder. If all goes well, in time I shall become a master and have my own journeyman, and my wife will be treated as a master's wife. This is what I call something. I call it all nothing, said the third. Not in reality any position. There are many in a town far above a master builder in position. You may be an upright man, but even as a master you will only be ranked among common men. I know better what to do than that. I will be an architect, which will place me among those who possess riches and intellect, and who speculate in art. I shall certainly have to rise by my own endeavors, from a bricklayer's laborer, or as a carpenter's apprentice, a lad wearing a paper cap, although I now wear a silk hat. I shall have to fetch beer and spirits for the journeymen, and they will call me thou, which will be an insult. I shall endure it, however, for I shall look upon it all as a mere representation, a masquerade, a mummery, which tomorrow, that is, when I myself as a journeyman shall have served my time, will vanish, and I shall go my way, and all that has passed will be nothing to me. Then I shall enter the academy, and get instructed in drawing, and be called an architect. I may even attain to rank, and have something placed before or after my name, and I shall build as others have done before me. By this there will be always something to make me remembered. And is not that worth living for? Not in my opinion, said the fourth. I will never follow the lead of others, and only imitate what they have done. I will be a genius, and become greater than all of you together. I will create a new style of building, and introduce a plan for erecting houses suitable to the climate, with material easily obtained in the country, and thus suit national feeling and the developments of the age, besides building a story for my own genius. But supposing the climate and the material are not good for much, said the fifth brother, that would be very unfortunate for you and have an influence over your experiments. Nationality may assert itself until it becomes affectation, and the developments of a century may run wild, as youth often does. I see clearly that none of you will ever really be anything worth notice, however you may now fancy it. But do as you like, I shall not imitate you. I mean to keep clear of all these things, and criticize what you do. In every action, something imperfect may be discovered, something not right, which I shall make it my business to find out and expose. That will be something, I fancy. And he kept his word, and became a critic. People said of this fifth brother, there is something very precise about him. He has a good headpiece, but he does nothing. And on that very account, they thought he must be something. Now, you see, this is a little history which will never end. As long as the world exists, there will always be men like these 5 brothers. And what became of them? Were they each nothing or something? You shall hear. It is quite a history. The eldest brother, he who fabricated bricks, soon discovered that each brick, when finished, brought him in a small coin, if only a copper one. And many copper pieces, if placed one upon another, can be changed into a shining shilling. And at whatever door a person knocks, who has a number of these in his hands, whether it be the baker's, the butcher's, or the tailor's, the door flies open, and he can get all he wants. So you see the value of bricks. Some of the bricks, however, crumbled to pieces, or were broken, but the elder brother found a use for even these. On the high bank of earth, which formed a dike on the seacoast, a poor woman named Margaret wished to build herself a house, so all the imperfect bricks were given to her, and a few whole ones with them. For the eldest brother was a kind-hearted man, although he never achieved anything higher than making bricks. The poor woman built herself a little house. It was small and narrow, and the window was quite crooked, the door too low, and the straw roof might have been better thatched. But still it was a shelter, and from within you could look far over the sea, which dashed wildly against the sea-wall on which the little house was built. The salt waves sprinkled their white foam over it, but it stood firm, and remained long after he who had given the bricks to build it was dead and buried. The second brother, of course, knew better how to build than poor Margaret, for he served an apprenticeship to learn it. When his time was up, he packed up his knapsack and went on his travels, singing the journeyman's song. While young, I can wander without a care, and build new houses everywhere. Fair and bright are my dreams of home, always thought of wherever I roam. Hurrah for a workman's life of glee. There's a loved one at home who thinks of me. Home and friends I can ne'er forget, and I mean to be a master yet. And that is what he did. On his return home, he became a master builder, built one house after another in the town, till they formed quite a street, which, when finished, became really an ornament to the town. These houses built a house for him in return, which was to be his own. But how can houses build a house? If the houses were asked, they could not answer, but the people would understand and say, "Certainly the street built his house for him." It was not very large, and the floor was of lime. But when he danced with his bride on the lime-covered floor, it was to him white and shining, and from every stone in the wall flowers seemed to spring forth and decorate the room as with the richest tapestry. It was really a pretty house, and in it were a happy pair. The flag of the corporation fluttered before it, and the journeymen and apprentices shouted, "Hurrah!" He had gained his position, he had made himself something, and at last he died, which was something too. Now we come to the architect, the third brother, who had been first a carpenter's apprentice, had worn a cap, and served as an errand boy, but afterwards went to the academy, and risen to be an architect, a high and noble gentleman. Ah, yes, the houses of the new street, which the brother who was a master builder erected, may have built his house for him, but the street received its name from the architect, and the handsomest house in the street became his property. That was something, and he was something, for he had a list of titles before and after his name. His children were called well-born, and when he died, his widow was treated as a lady of position, and that was something. His name remained always written at the corner of the street, and lived in everyone's mouth as its name. Yes, this also was something. Ye. And what about the genius of the family, the fourth brother, who wanted to invent something new and original? He tried to build a lofty story himself, but it fell to pieces, and he fell with it and broke his neck. However, he had a splendid funeral, with the city flags and music in the procession. Flowers were strewn on the pavement, and 3 orations were spoken over his grave, each one longer than the other. He would have liked this very much during his life, as well as the poems about him in the papers, for he liked nothing so well as to be talked of. A monument was also erected over his grave. It was only another story over him, but that was something. Now he was dead, like the 3 other brothers. The youngest, the critic, outlived them all, which was quite right for him. It gave him the opportunity of having the last word, which to him was of great importance. People always said he had a good headpiece. At last his hour came, and he died, and arrived at the gates of heaven. Souls always enter these gates in pairs. So he found himself standing and waiting for admission with another. And who should it be but old Dame Margaret from the house on the dike? It is evidently for the sake of contrast that I and this wretched soul should arrive here exactly at the same time, said the critic. Pray, who are you, my good woman? Said he. Do you want to get in here too? And the old woman curtsied as well as she could. She thought it must be St. Peter himself who spoke to her. I am a poor old woman, she said, without my family. I am old Margaret, that lived in the house on the dike. Well, and what have you done? What great deed have you performed down below? I have done nothing at all in the world that could give me a claim to have these doors open for me, she said. It would be only through mercy that I can be allowed to slip in through the gate. In what manner did you leave the world? He asked, just for the sake of saying something, for it made him feel very weary to stand there and wait. How I left the world, she replied. Why, I can scarcely tell you. During the last years of my life, I was sick and miserable, and I was unable to bear creeping out of bed suddenly into the frost and cold. Last winter was a hard winter, but I have got over it all now. There were a few mild days. As your honor no doubt knows, the ice lay thickly on the lake, as far one could see. The people came from the town and walked upon it, and they say there were dancing and skating upon it, I believe, and a great feasting. The sound of beautiful music came into my poor little room where I lay. Towards evening, when the moon rose beautifully, though not yet in her full splendor, I glanced from my bed over the wide sea, and there, just where the sea and sky met, rose a curious white cloud. I lay looking at the cloud till I observed a little black spot in the middle of it, which gradually grew larger and larger, and then I knew what it meant. I am old and experienced, and although this token is not often seen, I knew it, and a shuddering seized me. Twice in my life had I seen this same thing, and I knew that there would be an awful storm, with a spring tide, which would overwhelm the poor people who were now out on the ice, drinking, dancing, and making merry. Young and old, the whole city were there. Who was to warn them if no one noticed the sign, or knew what it meant as I did? I was so alarmed that I felt more strength and life than I had done for some time. I got out of bed and reached the window. I could not crawl any farther from weakness and exhaustion, but I managed to open the window. I saw the people outside running and jumping about on the ice. I saw the beautiful flags waving in the wind. I heard the boys shouting, "Hurrah!" and the lads and lasses singing, and everything full of merriment and joy. But there was the white cloud with the black spot hanging over them. I cried out as loudly as I could, but no one heard me. I was too far off from the people. Soon would the storm burst, the ice break, and all who were on it be irretrievably lost. They could not hear me, and to go to them was quite out of my power. Oh, if I could only get them safe on land. Then came the thought, as if from heaven, that I would rather set fire to my bed and let the house be burnt down than that so many people should perish miserably. I got a light, and in a few moments the red flames leaped up as a beacon to them. I escaped, fortunately, as far as the threshold of the door. But there I fell down and remained. I could go no farther. The flames rushed out towards me, flickered on the window, and rose high above the roof. The people on the ice became aware of the fire and ran as fast as possible to help a poor, sick woman who, as they thought, was being burnt to death. There was not one who did not run. I heard them coming, and I also, at the same time, was conscious of a rush of air and a sound like the roar of heavy artillery. The spring flood was lifting the ice covering, which brake into 1,000 pieces. But the people had reached the seawall, where the sparks were flying round. I had saved them all, but I suppose I could not survive the cold and fright, so I came up here to the gates of paradise. I am told they are open to poor creatures such as I am, and I have now no house left on earth. But I do not think that will give me a claim to be admitted here. Then the gates were opened, and an angel led the old woman in. She had dropped one little straw out of her straw bed when she set it on fire to save the lives of so many. It had been changed into the purest gold, into gold that constantly grew and expanded into flowers and fruit of immortal beauty. "See," said the angel, pointing to the wonderful straw. "This is what the poor woman has brought. What dost thou bring? I know thou hast accomplished nothing, not even made a single brick. Even if thou couldst return, and at least produce so much, very likely, when made, the brick would be useless, unless done with a good will, which is always something. But thou canst not return to earth, and I can do nothing for thee." Then the poor soul, the old mother who had lived in the house on the dike, pleaded for him. She said, "His brother made all the stone and bricks, and sent them to me to build my poor little dwelling, which was a great deal to do for a poor woman like me. Could not all these bricks and pieces be as a wall of stone to prevail for him? It is an act of mercy. He is wanting it now. And here is the very fountain of mercy." "Then," said the angel, "thy brother, he who has been looked upon as the meanest of you all, he whose honest deeds to thee appeared so humble, it is he who has sent you this heavenly gift. Thou shalt not be turned away. Thou shalt have permission to stand without the gate and reflect, and repent of thy life on earth. But thou shalt not be admitted here until thou hast performed one good deed of repentance, which will indeed for thee be something." I could have expressed that better, thought the critic, but he did not say it aloud, which for him was something after all. The Marsh King's Daughter. The storks relate to their little ones a great many stories, and they are all about moors and reed banks, and suited to their age and capacity. The youngest of them are quite satisfied with cribble, crabble, or such nonsense, and think it very grand. But the elder ones want something with a deeper meaning, or at least something about their own family. We are only acquainted with one of the two longest and oldest stories which the storks relate. It is about Moses, who was exposed by his mother on the banks of the Nile, and was found by the king's daughter, who gave him a good education, and he afterwards became a great man. But where he was buried is still unknown. Everyone knows this story, but not the second. Very likely because it is quite an inland story. It has been repeated from mouth to mouth, from one stork mama to another, for thousands of years. And each has told it better than the last. And now we mean to tell it better than all. The first stork pair who related it lived at the time. It happened, and had their summer residence on the rafters of the Viking's house, which stood near the wild moorlands of Wensissel. That is, to speak more correctly, the great moor heath, high up in the north of Jutland, by the Skjagen Peak. This wilderness is still an immense, wild heath of marshy ground, about which we can read in the official directory. It is said that in olden times the place was a lake. the ground of which had heaved up from beneath, and now the moorland extends for miles in every direction and is surrounded by damp meadows, trembling, undulating swamps, and marshy ground covered with turf on which grow bilberry bushes and stunted trees. Mists are almost always hovering over this region, which 70 years ago was overrun with wolves. It may well be called the Wild Moor, and one can easily imagine, with such a wild expanse of marsh and lake, how lonely and dreary it must have been 1,000 years ago. Many things may be noticed now that existed then. The reeds grow to the same height and bear the same kind of long purple-brown leaves with their feathery tips. There still stands the birch, with its white bark and its delicate, loosely hanging leaves. And with regard to the living beings who frequented this spot, the fly still wears a gauzy dress of the same cut, and the favorite colors of the stork are white, with black and red for stockings. The people, certainly in those days, wore very different dresses to those they now wear. But if any of them, be he huntsman or squire, master or servant, ventured on the wavering, undulating, marshy ground of the moor, they met with the same fate 1,000 years ago as they would now. The wanderer sank and went down to the Marsh King, as he is named, who rules in the great moorland empire beneath. They also called him Guncle King, but we like the name of Marsh King better, and we will give him that name as the storks do. Very little is known of the Marsh King's rule, but that, perhaps, is a good thing. In the neighborhood of the moorlands, and not far from the great arm of the North Sea and the Kattegat, which is called the Lumfjorden, lay the castle of the Viking, with its watertight stone cellars, its tower, and its 3 projecting stories. On the ridge of the roof, the stork had built his nest, and there the stork mama sat on her eggs and felt sure her hatching would come to something. One evening, Stork Papa stayed out rather late, and when he came home, he seemed quite busy, bustling, and important. "I have something very dreadful to tell you," said he to the stork mama. "Keep it to yourself, then," she replied. "Remember that I am hatching eggs. It may agitate me, and will affect them." "You must know it at once," said he. "The daughter of our host in Egypt has arrived here. She has ventured to take this journey, and now she is lost. She who sprung from the race of the fairies. Is it?" cried the mother stork. "Oh, tell me all about it. You know I cannot bear to be kept waiting at a time when I am hatching eggs." "Well, you see, mother," he replied. "She believed what the doctors said, and what I have heard you state also, that the moor flowers which grow about here would heal her sick father. And she has flown to the north in swan's plumage, in company with some other swan princesses, who come to these parts every year to renew their youth. She came, and where is she now?" "You enter into particulars too much," said the mamma stork, "and the eggs may take cold. I cannot bear such suspense as this." "Well," said he, "I have kept watch, and this evening I went among the rushes where I thought the marshy ground would bear me, and while I was there, 3 swans came. Something in their manner of flying seemed to say to me, 'Look carefully now, there is one not all swan, only swan's feathers.' You know, mother, you have the same intuitive feeling that I have. You know whether a thing is right or not immediately." "Yes, of course," said she. "But tell me about the princess. I am tired of hearing about the swan's feathers." "Well, you know that in the middle of the moor there is something like a lake," said the stork papa. "You can see the edge of it if you raise yourself a little. Just there, by the reeds and the green banks, lay the trunk of an elder tree. Upon this, the 3 swans stood flapping their wings and looking about them. One of them threw off her plumage, and I immediately recognized her as one of the princesses of our home in Egypt. There she sat, without any covering but her long black hair. I heard her tell the 2 others to take great care of the swan's plumage, while she dipped down into the water to pluck the flowers which she fancied she saw there. The others nodded and picked up the feathered dress and took possession of it. I wonder what will become of it, thought I, and she most likely asked herself the same question. If so, she received an answer, a very practical one, for the 2 swans rose up and flew away with her swan's plumage. "Dive down now," they cried. "Thou shalt never more fly in the swan's plumage. Thou shalt never again see Egypt. Here, on the moor, thou wilt remain." So saying, they tore the swan's plumage into 1,000 pieces. The feathers drifted about like a snow shower, and then the 2 deceitful princesses flew away. "Why, that is terrible," said the stork mamma. "I feel as if I could hardly bear to hear any more, but you must tell me what happened next." The princess wept and lamented aloud. Her tears moistened the elder stump, which was really not an elder stump, but the Marsh king himself, he who in marshy ground lives and rules. I saw myself how the stump of the tree turned round, and was a tree no more, while long, clammy branches like arms were extended from it. Then the poor child was terribly frightened, and started up to run away. She hastened to cross the green, slimy ground, but it will not bear any weight, much less hers. She quickly sank, and the elder stump dived immediately after her. In fact, it was he who drew her down. Great black bubbles rose up out of the moor slime, and with these, every trace of the 2 vanished. And now the princess is buried in the wild marsh. She will never now carry flowers to Egypt to cure her father. It would have broken your heart, mother, had you seen it. "You ought not to have told me," said she. "At such a time as this, the eggs might suffer, but I think the princess will soon find help. Someone will rise up to help her. Ah, if it had been you or I, or one of our people, it would have been all over with us." "I mean to go every day," said he, "to see if anything comes to pass." And so he did. A long time went by, but at last he saw a green stalk shooting up out of the deep, marshy ground. As it reached the surface of the marsh, a leaf spread out and unfolded itself broader and broader, and close to it came forth a bud. One morning, when the stork papa was flying over the stem, he saw that the power of the sun's rays had caused the bud to open, and in the cup of the flower lay a charming child. A little maiden, looking as if she had just come out of a bath. The little one was so like the Egyptian princess that the stork, at the first moment, thought it must be the princess herself, but after a little reflection, he decided that it was much more likely to be the daughter of the princess and the Marsh king, and this explained also her being placed in the cup of a water lily. "But she cannot be left to lie here," thought the stork, "and in my nest there are already so many. But stay, I have thought of something. The wife of the Viking has no children, and how often she has wished for a little one. People always say the stork brings the little ones. I will do so in earnest this time. I shall fly with the child to the Viking's wife. What rejoicing there will be!" And then the stork lifted the little girl out of the flower cup, flew to the castle, picked a hole with his beak in the bladder-covered window, and laid the beautiful child in the bosom of the Viking's wife. Then he flew back quickly to the stork mamma and told her what he had seen and done, and the little storks listened to it all, for they were then quite old enough to do so. "So you see," he continued, "that the princess is not dead, for she must have sent her little one up here, and now I have found a home for her." "Ah, I said it would be so from the first," replied the stork mama. "But now think a little of your own family. Our traveling time draws near, and I sometimes feel a little irritation already under the wings. The cuckoos and the nightingale are already gone, and I heard the quails say they should go too as soon as the wind was favorable. Our youngsters will go through all the maneuvers at the review very well, or I am much mistaken in them." The Viking's wife was above measure delighted when she awoke the next morning and found the beautiful little child lying in her bosom. She kissed it and caressed it, but it cried terribly and struck out with its arms and legs and did not seem to be pleased at all. At last it cried itself to sleep, and as it lay there so still and quiet, it was a most beautiful sight to see. The Viking's wife was so delighted that body and soul were full of joy. Her heart felt so light within her that it seemed as if her husband and his soldiers, who were absent, must come home as suddenly and unexpectedly as the little child had done. She and her whole household therefore busied themselves in preparing everything for the reception of her lord. The long, colored tapestry on which she and her maidens had worked pictures of their idols, Odin, Thor, and Frigga, was hung up. The slaves polished the old shields that served as ornaments, cushions were placed on the seats, and dry wood laid on the fireplaces in the center of the hall, so that the flames might be fanned up at a moment's notice. The Viking's wife herself assisted in the work, so that at night she felt very tired and quickly fell into a sound sleep. When she awoke, just before morning, she was terribly alarmed to find that the infant had vanished. She sprang from her couch, lighted a pine chip, and searched all round the room, when, at last, in that part of the bed where her feet had been, lay, not the child, but a great, ugly frog. She was quite disgusted at this sight, and seized a heavy stick to kill the frog. But the creature looked at her with such strange, mournful eyes that she was unable to strike the blow. Once more she searched round the room. Then she started at hearing the frog utter a low, painful croak. She sprang from the couch and opened the window hastily. At the same moment the sun rose and threw its beams through the window, till it rested on the couch where the great frog lay. Suddenly, it appeared as if the frog's broad mouth contracted and became small and red. The limbs moved and stretched out and extended themselves till they took a beautiful shape. And behold, there was the pretty child lying before her, and the ugly frog was gone. "How is this?" she cried. "Have I had a wicked dream? Is it not my own lovely cherub that lies there?" Then she kissed it and fondled it, but the child struggled and fought, and bit as if she had been a little wild cat. The Viking did not return on that day, nor the next. He was, however, on the way home, but the wind, so favorable to the storks, was against him, for it blew towards the south. A wind in favor of one is often against another. After 2 or 3 days had passed, it became clear to the Viking's wife how matters stood with the child. It was under the influence of a powerful sorcerer. By day, it was charming in appearance as an angel of light, but with a temper wicked and wild, while at night, in the form of an ugly frog, it was quiet and mournful, with eyes full of sorrow. Here were 2 natures, changing inwardly and outwardly with the absence and return of sunlight. And so it happened that by day the child, with the actual form of its mother, possessed the fierce disposition of its father. At night, on the contrary, its outward appearance plainly showed its descent on the father's side, while inwardly it had the heart and mind of its mother. Who would be able to loosen this wicked charm which the sorcerer had worked upon it? The wife of the Viking lived in constant pain and sorrow about it. Her heart clung to the little creature, but she could not explain to her husband the circumstances in which it was placed. He was expected to return shortly, and were she to tell him, he would very likely, as was the custom at that time, expose the poor child in the public highway, and let anyone take it away who would. The good wife of the Viking could not let that happen, and she therefore resolved that the Viking should never see the child, excepting by daylight. One morning there sounded a rushing of storks' wings over the roof. More than 100 pair of storks had rested there during the night to recover themselves after their excursion, and now they soared aloft and prepared for the journey southward. "All the husbands are here and ready," they cried. "Wives and children also." "How light we are," screamed the young storks in chorus. "Something pleasant seems creeping over us, even down to our toes, as if we were full of live frogs. Ah, how delightful it is to travel into foreign lands." "Hold yourselves properly in the line with us," cried Papa and Mama. "Do not use your beaks so much. It tries the lungs." And then the storks flew away. About the same time sounded the clang of the warriors' trumpets across the heath. The Viking had landed with his men. They were returning home, richly laden with spoil from the Gallic coast, where the people, as did also the inhabitants of Britain, often cried in alarm, "Deliver us from the wild Northmen." Life and noisy pleasure came with them into the castle of the Viking on the moorland. A great cask of mead was drawn into the hall, piles of wood blazed, cattle were slain and served up, that they might feast in reality. The priest who offered the sacrifice sprinkled the devoted parishioners with the warm blood. The fire crackled, and the smoke rolled along beneath the roof. The soot fell upon them from the beams, but they were used to all these things. Guests were invited and received handsome presents. All wrongs and unfaithfulness were forgotten. They drank deeply and threw in each other's faces the bones that were left, which was looked upon as a sign of good feeling amongst them. A bard, who was a kind of musician as well as warrior, and who had been with the Viking in his expedition and knew what to sing about, gave them one of his best songs, in which they heard all their warlike deeds praised, and every wonderful action brought forward with honor. Every verse ended with this refrain: "Gold and possessions will flee away, friends and foes must die one day. Every man on earth must die, but a famous name will never die." And with that they beat upon their shields and hammered upon the table with knives and bones in a most outrageous manner. The Viking's wife sat upon a raised cross seat in the open hall. She wore a silk dress, golden bracelets, and large amber beads. She was in costly attire, and the bard named her in his song and spoke of the rich treasure of gold which she had brought to her husband. Her husband had already seen the wonderfully beautiful child in the daytime and was delighted with her beauty. Even her wild ways pleased him. He said the little maiden would grow up to be a heroine with the strong will and determination of a man. She would never wink her eyes, even if, in joke, an expert hand should attempt to cut off her eyebrows with a sharp sword. The full cask of mead soon became empty, and a fresh one was brought in, for these were people who liked plenty to eat and drink. The old proverb, which everyone knows, says that the cattle know when to leave their pasture, but a foolish man knows not the measure of his own appetite. Yes, they all knew this, but men may know what is right and yet often do wrong. They also knew that even the welcome guest becomes wearisome when he sits too long in the house. But there they remained, for pork and mead are good things. And so at the Vikings' house they stayed and enjoyed themselves. And at night the bondmen slept in the ashes and dipped their fingers in the fat and licked them. Oh, it was a delightful time. Once more in the same year the Viking went forth, though the storms of autumn had already commenced to roar. He went with his warriors to the coast of Britain. He said that it was but an excursion of pleasure across the water, so his wife remained at home with the little girl. After a while, it is quite certain the foster mother began to love the poor frog, with its gentle eyes and its deep sighs, even better than the little beauty who bit and fought with all around her. The heavy, damp mists of autumn, which destroy the leaves of the wood, had already fallen upon forest and heath. Feathers of plucked birds, as they call the snow, flew about in thick showers, and winter was coming. The sparrows took possession of the stork's nest and conversed about the absent owners in their own fashion. And they, the stork pair and all their young ones, where were they staying now? The storks might have been found in the land of Egypt, where the sun's rays shone forth bright and warm, as it does here at midsummer. Tamarinds and acacias were in full bloom all over the country. The crescent of Mahomet glittered brightly from the cupolas of the mosques, and on the slender pinnacles sat many of the storks, resting after their long journey. Swarms of them took divided possession of the nests which lay close to each other between the venerable columns and crowded the arches of temples in forgotten cities. The date and the palm lifted themselves as a screen or as a sunshade over them. The gray pyramids looked like broken shadows in the clear air and the far-off desert, where the ostrich wheels his rapid flight, and the lion, with his subtle eyes, gazes at the marble sphinx which lies half buried in sand. The waters of the Nile had retreated, and the whole bed of the river was covered with frogs, which was a most acceptable prospect for the stork families. The young storks thought their eyes deceived them. Everything around appeared so beautiful. "It is always like this here, and this is how we live in our warm country," said the stork mama, and the thought made the young ones almost beside themselves with pleasure. "Is there anything more to see?" they asked. "Are we going farther into the country?" "There is nothing further for us to see," answered the stork mama. "Beyond this delightful region there are immense forests, where the branches of the trees entwine round each other, while prickly, creeping plants cover the paths, and only an elephant could force a passage for himself with his great feet. The snakes are too large, and the lizards too lively for us to catch. Then there is the desert. If you went there, your eyes would soon be full of sand with the lightest breeze, and if it should blow great guns, you would most likely find yourself in a sand drift. Here is the best place for you, where there are frogs and locusts. Here I shall remain, and so must you." And so they stayed. The parents sat in the nest on the slender minaret and rested, yet still were busily employed in cleaning and smoothing their feathers and in sharpening their beaks against their red stockings. Then they would stretch out their necks, salute each other, and gravely raise their heads with the high, polished forehead and soft, smooth feathers, while their brown eyes shone with intelligence. The female young ones strutted about amid the moist rushes, glancing at the other young storks and making acquaintances, and swallowing a frog at every third step, or tossing a little snake about with their beaks in a way they considered very becoming, and besides, it tasted very good. The young male storks soon began to quarrel. They struck at each other with their wings and pecked with their beaks till the blood came. And in this manner many of the young ladies and gentlemen were betrothed to each other. It was, of course, what they wanted, and indeed what they lived for. Then they returned to a nest, and there the quarreling began afresh, for in hot countries people are almost all violent and passionate. But for all that it was pleasant, especially for the old people, who watched them with great joy. All that their young ones did suited them. Every day here there was sunshine, plenty to eat, and nothing to think of but pleasure. But in the rich castle of their Egyptian host, as they called him, pleasure was not to be found. The rich and mighty lord of the castle lay on his couch in the midst of the great hall, with its many colored walls looking like the center of a great tulip. But he was stiff and powerless in all his limbs, and lay stretched out like a mummy. His family and servants stood round him. He was not dead, although he could scarcely be said to live. The healing moor flower from the north, which was to have been found and brought to him by her who loved him so well, had not arrived. His young and beautiful daughter who, in swan's plumage, had flown over land and seas to the distant north, had never returned. She is dead, so the two swan maidens had said when they came home, and they made up quite a story about her. And this is what they told.